Good evening and welcome to Superpower Broadcasting. My name is Kevin Castley. Thank you for being with us tonight. In this stream, we're going to be talking about the classic meme, horseshoe theory. And in this stream, we're going to be taking a look at some examples of it in real life, and we're going to be reacting, and we're going to be responding to a lot of fringe and cringe that's out there in the political sphere in the last few years. And we're joined tonight by an awesome panel. We have four guests here. We have Anthony Roberto, Global Affairs on Twitter. We've got Ray Marasame. You can check out Stage 501 that she does on YouTube. We've got Henry of American Madhouse. You can go and check out his channel. And we've got Wyatt of the National Telegraph. You can go and check out that publication as well. We'll get to the panelists in just a moment. I just want to open this stream by saying, first off, it'd be awesome if you could give this video a like and definitely subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. Additionally, we're trying to get up to 50 followers on Twitch. So if you could go over to Twitch and follow the Superpower Broadcasting, that'd be great. So we can get to the affiliate status with Twitch. That all being said, thanks for being with us. And, it's going to be a really interesting stream tonight. And we're going to be joined a little later by a very, very controversial and always, always an interesting guest. So stay tuned, everybody. And with that, we will go to the panelists. How is everybody doing tonight?
Pretty good. I'm ready.
Doing wonderful, man.
Oh man, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm good as well.
Yeah, this is going to be at the very least interesting based on the clips I already compiled.
Yes, well, I before we went live over the course of the last few hours, I had sought some clips from the panelists here as well as some other people, in our community, to get good examples of horseshoe theory and whatnot. I know Wyatt sent a clip over. Anthony had one. We've got a few that I have compiled for us to go into, and we're going to be looking at some far right, some far left, a little bit in between on either side, and we're going to be taking a look. And in many ways, of course, we all know here, if you watch this channel, who these figures are. But in some of these cases, it's kind of hard to tell if you didn't know who they are, if you're watching a leftist, a far left, or a far right figure speak. And so before we get into the videos, though, there is, to open up this stream, there is a famous image that I think really encapsulates what horseshoe theory looks like in the modern era in which we're living in our contemporary times. And that is what you're seeing here on the screen. It's a photo that was taken, I believe this was in 2015, of Jill Stein, who was at the time the candidate for the Green Party of the United States, running for president. And she's sitting to Putin's left, and she's a far left lunatic, essentially. And on Putin's right, you see there, in the far left corner of this image, Michael Flynn, who was for a brief time Trump's national security advisor, pretty right-wing guy with pretty pro-Russian views. And what's interesting here is that one is obviously, very leaning towards the Republicans. The other is so far left that she doesn't fit in the Democratic Party. And at the end of the day, they're both there dining with the devil, essentially, in the layer of evil in the Kremlin's establishment in Moscow. And you're like, how is the Green Party, a party which supposedly champions environmentalism, social liberalism, these sorts of ideas, how is she having a great time chilling with Putin, a man who at the time was drilling the most oil of any country in the world and exporting the most gas of any country in the world? That seems pretty anti-Green Party to me. And of course, he's so socially conservative. His country is being torturing and executing people for allegedly being homosexuals, for example. With Michael Flynn, it makes more sense in a sense of, well, he has some more things in common if you look at it just in terms of right and left and whatnot. But But American republicanism used to be a very anti-Russian thing. I mean, if you go back to Reagan, Reagan made the Russians bow down to him. And now, when the new horseshoe theory and the era of cringe in which we live, the common trait here that's shared by the elements of the far left and the far right is an admiration and loyalty to the Kremlin and the Putin system. And so with that, I'd like to get the thoughts of our panelists. We're just going to take the image off the screen so we can see everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. They're just having a meal with the guy. Well, no, I'm really saying that. Like, it depends on what they're talking about, I guess. They're eating with the guy. Is there something nefarious about that?
I think there's something nefarious about a presidential candidate having dinner and happy times with Vladimir Putin. I think that's an inappropriate thing to do. I think, but
she's just asking questions.
To be fair, I do think that they tend to seat you around people that you like get along with. They don't just sort of like slap Vladimir Putin next to John Bolton for the dinner.
Exactly. Also, I think the thing that made that most astounding was you mentioned that, that at that time Putin was doing lots of drilling for oil and obviously natural gas, right? I mean, during that exact time period that we're talking about, this is the time at which Greenpeace and other environmentalist groups were pointing out that not only were they engaged in the largest amount of avoidable fossil fuel drilling, they were also letting the environmental damage fall mostly onto the indigenous peoples of Siberia. So, like, if you're, like, the leader of a supposed Green Party, like, you can't even be in the same room as that individual at that point. Like, I mean, not only is this guy basically a murderer, favor of progressive, ongoing genocide in Siberia, and also poisoning the waterways and the areas that indigenous peoples need to inhabit. He's there literally sitting down there, interfering in American elections while she's sitting across the table from him.
Yeah, I think where the horseshoe theory sort of thing comes into play for Jill Stein is even though basically Vladimir Putin embodies everything she opposes, I think that there's sort of like a strange admiration for the amount of power people like Vladimir Putin have that Jill Stein, for her own agenda, wishes she had. So she almost like looks up to him in this stupid, ironic way.
Oh, yes. Yeah. She sees Putin as an anti-imperialist champion who's fighting NATO and American expansionism around the world.
Imagine a person actually like thinking that while he is literally occupying Crimea, for example, and having this war in Ukraine.
Oh, but it's their sphere of influence, bro. It's just their sphere of influence. There used to be Russians there. Like, there's still some ethnic Russians there, which, by the way, that ethnic Russian argument, you use that argument to justify taking like a lot of countries in Eastern Europe. So,
exactly. And of course, that's a concerted strategy, which they have used as well, which is that they'll forcibly invade your location, and then they'll encourage a small migration of ethnic Russians into your territory and have them in a particular community or neighborhood. And then they will pull out. And then if you do anything that Russia doesn't like, they'll just magically accuse you of anti-Russian racism for no apparent reason. And say, it's our sphere of influence because we have 4 people in that location, so now your whole country belongs to us.
Well,
or
like even in Estonia,
or they'll claim that a certain people group is more aligned with Russia, like the people in South Ossetia and Abkhazia and Georgia.
Oh yeah,
where it's like you guys clearly don't care about them because when you quote unquote liberated them, you treated them like trash, and now they're living like it's 1985, except nothing's been updated since 1985.
They created a literal kleptocracy in Ossetia once they actually set up what they were going to do there, and it's a kleptocracy basically based on the hierarchy of people who have connections to the FSB. So, every single time they do this, it produces the same outcome, which is they'll talk some nonsense about freedom, and then they will enter forcefully, as Russia tends to do, and then they'll immediately strip away everything that is even remotely recognizable as freedom.
But
and this goes back to World War II, because you'll recall that one of Hitler's justifications for his initial territorial grabs in the Sudetenland, the Rhineland, and even to some extent into Poland, was a claim to we're just defending the German minorities in the region from racial discrimination by the states they live in. So we're taking their territory, and that's with Putin, because it's not just that they insert, little green men or whatever. There are legitimately Russian minority communities living in the Baltic states, Estonia, for example, as well as Poland, and especially Ukraine, especially Eastern Ukraine. And so this logic of, and I've had people repeat this to me at my university, for example, unironically, that, well, I mean, there are a lot of ethnic Russians there. It's like, yes, but by that logic, I mean, what's the threshold? Is it 20%? Because in the case in Ukraine, you'll note that they had the rhetoric that the majority of the people there are ethnically Russian, so we belong there. But in Estonia, they make the exact opposite case. They say there's a small minority of Russians that are constantly discriminated against. Therefore, we have a legitimate claim to intervene there. And so it's wherever there's Russians, that's our sphere of influence.
Also, just on that, just two things. The reason that argument's also just stupid is that if there's there's ethnic Russians there, and they're somehow like loyal to Russia, or they are like they love Russia in some way, and the Russians need to add them to their sphere of influence. It's like, well, why didn't they just move to Russia? It's like clearly they want to live in these other countries for a reason. And so then my second thing is, doesn't this then make the argument that Saudi Arabia should be able to invade Qatar, because most of the people there's like the people in Qatar are like the actual native Qataris people, I don't know how you say it, but they're like a minority in their own country to Indians and Saudis.
Well, same thing with the United Arab Emirates as well. I mean, by that logic, I guess India needs to annex the UAE immediately.
Right. Well, I think the other thing is, too, when it comes to Russia, is that, like, and I've explained this before, is that, like, they have a demographic crisis that's going on there, because there's too many people dying, not enough people being born, etc. So, they see, I mean, it's not entirely the reason, but it's part of the reason, because they want to boost, their population a little bit. And what way to do it, and I guess in a more... And I guess if you can't control the birth rates as much, what do? You do a land grab, and that's what they did with Crimea, because it technically did boost their population a little bit, So I think there is that part of it that no one really talks about as much, because they made them citizens too.
Well, it's not just about birth rates. I mean, obviously, if it were simply a matter of birth rates in conflict, then Israel would have lost the Arab regimes. But in the case of Russia, it's a low birth rate coupled with very apparently inferior technology. Like if we go back to the 70s or 80s, even, you could say they had parity with America, or even in some cases, such as the nuclear arsenal, they had superiority. But now they have only inferiority. There's no area except for cyber warfare in which they're ahead right now. And so that's what they cling to, are these asymmetrical tactics. So
I remember during the 2015 military parade, their T-14 broke down in the middle of like the parade, and the wheel fell off or whatever. Like, that's where you're going to go to battle with, buddy. You can't even survive a parade. How's it going to survive combat?
Oh man. Well, that there was just, that was the intro sort of image to kind of kick off the theme of this. We've got a few clips to get through before our special guest of the evening arrives. The first one that we're going to go to was pointed out and sent to me by Wyatt here. So it's about a 55-second clip or so. We're just going to watch it, and then I'll let Wyatt give his thoughts, and then we'll go to the panel. So this is a clip of Stephen Crowder here. Here we go.
Sure. Well, the libertarian argument, I mean, libertarians will make those arguments, but the libertarian argument is you own your body. You get to decide what you do with it. It's morally wrong for the government to say you can put this in your body and not that.
Yeah.
So you agree with that?
I made the case in the video. It's a state issue. If states want to legalize marijuana, fine. Well, I would vote against legalizing it in my state because I don't.
So you would vote to use the force of government to interfere with an individual's right to decide what they put in their body based on your opinion?
I guess you don't understand the role of federal government.
Enlighten me.
Well, you understand the difference between states' rights and federal government's rights. So you believe that there should be a federal ban on any state making marijuana illegal?
I don't think governments have rights. I think individuals have rights. That's the libertarian case.
So the libertarian does not believe in any fundamental role of federal government? Well, because if you don't believe in a fundamental role of limited federal government, if you don't frame it in and give it legitimate parameters, then you're just opening the floodgates for anyone to tack onto the list whatever they want. Exactly. I believe the fundamental role of the government, and I've used this analogy as a Canadian me, is the role of a hockey referee.
Yeah, so I sent that video over because I thought that was a good example of how libertarians end up sort of slowly moving their way into authoritarianism, where to actually uphold their strange utopian view of how the world should work, they actually need the federal government to be dictatorial and not allowing localities to make their own laws that sort of suit their cultures the best.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested to get the opinions of the rest of the panel here, because like I'm somebody who supports marijuana legalization, but at the same time, I can understand why some people would be hesitant to necessarily have everything directed by the federal government. So, you know,
it doesn't even have to be marijuana. You could replace it with anything. You could say, like, if a random community wants to, for some reason, just be a dry community, or just a community wants to lower the maximum speed limit on highways to a certain one, they're allowed to do it. And that was sort of the thing I found that was sort of strange with libertarians, is that they sort of are about individual rights, but the thing is, then they'll trample your rights just to sort of implement their view of how government should work in a community that they're not even like near or close to.
See, I wouldn't say that about libertarians across the board. I feel like Steven Crowder, like what that demonstrated to me was he's not a libertarian. Is what it came across to me as.
That's my point. It was more
conservative.
He's
a conservative that is like trying to frame himself as a libertarian that cares about individual rights, when he clearly doesn't. He has some very conservative viewpoints, and for convenience sake, he calls himself a libertarian.
For context, this wasn't like Steven Crowder trying to make himself come off as a libertarian. This was sort of Adam Kokesh, the guy who's currently running for the Libertarian Party, who sort of gave him an ambush interview, and then my pollster.
He does call himself a libertarian, right?
I think he says he's a conservative who has like libertarian leanings.
See, I feel like they're like trying to get like both sides of the aisle, like weirdly, because it's like they want the liberals like for the weed, but they also want like the conservatives for like the small government, and like I just think it's kind of like a weird voting block, I guess. Like I don't know. I mean, like I'm not like very like too caught up with like in real life libertarian.
I've heard that before, where it's just libertarians or conservatives that want to smoke pot, basically.
Yeah, something to that effect, though. I mean, I know some of the ones online are pretty crazy. So yeah.
Oh man. I don't really have too many thoughts on it, because it's the sort of thing that when I look at that, I can understand both positions in a way. I can understand the argument that, well, yeah, individuals have, the individual is who you should be concerned about their rights. But the problem is then, if you follow it to its logical conclusion, that argument can basically be made to justify getting rid of any government role in anything eventually.
And Adam Kokesh's current libertarian campaign is based on, he said, the orderly dissolving of the federal government, which is again is ridiculous, because in that clip, I know it's an older clip, but he hasn't changed on any of this stuff. He's essentially arguing that you need a strong federal government to basically club every single locality and county into making sure that they have the perfect libertarian system of law.
Right. I mean, it's basically using the bully pulpit and using if he became president, and using the apparatus of the government to dismantle the government, essentially, is kind of like his agenda.
That's where they become like socialists in the way that they view government, and in the sense they have to be absolutely like totalitarians in their standardlessness.
Yeah. See, I don't know. I mean, for me, I feel like the big thing is that I'm kind of somewhere in between the two, because I can understand that, like, on some level, you do need to have standards across the country. Like, for example, you couldn't allow slavery in any state, that kind of stuff. Like, when it comes to human rights, he's probably making the case there that it should probably be like a right to smoke marijuana, essentially. But you'll have a lot of people that would say it should be up to states to decide. And I can see the argument that if you have different states, that you can kind of pick and choose where you want to live that best reflects your values in that sense.
Yeah, that's what I think as well. It's just that everything still has to be constitutional, whether you're in Canada or the U.S. or any sort of Western democracy. But no sort of standard should be like the one set standard on arbitrary issues like that.
Right. Well, I mean, as long as everything's within the Constitution, I don't really have too much of a problem with having, a decent amount of autonomy given to states. I think that it's a good thing that states are able to, control if they're going to have like a state income tax, that kind of stuff. They can play around with market conditions to try to make themselves more competitive. And you can see, like right now, obviously Henry's talked about this before, how Texas is picking up a lot of people that are moving there now because California hasn't made itself very competitive. It's got high taxes, high property prices, and Texas offers opportunity in that sense.
So I do have, I guess one thing for libertarian people, like if they do want, I guess, more states to have, I guess, more autonomy, like what laws do they specifically want to get rid of? Like what exactly does the federal government do? Because I know they don't have like full autonomy, but it seems like they have like a lot of autonomy. But I don't know.
Oh man.
Hey, I'm gonna take off, man. I'm sorry I couldn't stay on longer. I told you, it's
yeah.
Could only come on for a short bit, but thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on. Thanks for coming on, Henry. Always a good time, and have a good night.
Yeah.
Here's a quality 20 minutes.
Yeah, with that, we're going to invite Jaeger on because I know that Jaeger had expressed interest in coming on, and then we'll have a special guest on, very interesting guest that some of the fans of the channel will remember. From a little interaction we had over on Henry's channel a little while ago, but I'm just going to send Jaeger the link right now, and then we're going to get into the next video. So the next video that I have, it's quite a bit more crazy. It's also from a right winger, but you couldn't really tell based on his rhetoric here. So we're going to take a look. It's a pretty short clip, but just brace yourselves, everybody. You're in for a big bundle of yikes and cringe.
And so I hear people talking all the time about socialism is the biggest threat to our country. America will never be a socialist nation. America will never fall to communism. You know what? I would any day of the fucking week have America become a communist country, full-on Stalinism, than what we're doing right now, or what we've been doing for the past 50 years. Sorry for the language, but seriously, I would rather have Bernie Sanders be president for 1,000 years if we cannot be doing what we're doing right now with immigration.
Wow.
Not
70% Stalin, not 70% Stalin, not 76% Stalin, not even 87% Stalin. Full Stalin, 100% Stalin. Nick Fuentes, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, the darling of the alt-right, the far right, right there.
See what actually amazes me is that it's like like he always claims to be, I guess, like anti-socialist in some streams, but I guess like in that clip, I guess he's really angry though. But what's funny is that it's like when he goes on to conservative like Zoom calls or whatever, like he'll claim himself as to be like a nationalist, like capitalist or whatever. Yep. But like at the end of the day, like he is kind of like a Nazbol, and it's kind of funny.
He took the mask off. He took the mask off right there. He took the mask off. I'm gonna have a video, just a solo video where I break down my thoughts on that. That's obviously from a few months ago. That whole thing got deleted, but I was able to get the clip still. The thing that's interesting about this, there's a number of things to note here. He calls himself America First. He wraps himself in Trump and everything. But then, he lets the mask off and he's like, I'd rather have Stalin than what we're doing right now, because he's like, I mean, to him, Trump isn't doing anything about immigration. So
I think it just goes to show a lot of these, a lot of people like Nick Fuentes, all they really like is they just like the aesthetic of authoritarianism. So it doesn't matter that it's communism. He still gets the nice uniforms, and he still gets the totalitarian control, and he still gets to block immigration. So it's all fine at the end of the day. It's like I think he would even prefer, honestly, Stalinism to even just lowering immigration and then keeping the economic system. Because I do think he's just attracted to the trappings of authoritarianism at the end of the day.
Oh, for sure. For sure. He often has talked about how capitalism and all this stuff basically just serves Jews, and then American capitalism, American markets just serve Israel and stuff. And I was going to make the meme about how, he literally, he's fine becoming a communist to own the libs, but it's not even owning the libs. It's to own conservatives. Like his whole thing, his whole point of his whole war and his movement is to destroy the American traditional conservative movement so that he can have his little Groyper, ethno state sort of thing come in. And of course it's going to be like National Socialism. So,
and the thing is too, that it's like, he hides his actual position to the, I guess for someone who's like a white nationalist, of course, like, again, like he's kind of two-faced on that issue. And it's like, it's kind of crazy, like, and it's not something he really talks about very often too. It's like when you've seen him at like CPAC or whatever, when he was, before he got banned, it's like he would never talk about that. So he likes to hide his power level, like I guess that's what he does a lot,
I mean, the thing is, it's this clip here is not the first time that he's said rhetoric that would lead you to think that he's a socialist. A socialist nationalist, if you want to be polite about it, or a national socialist, if you want to be, precise about it. Essentially, he's the kind of guy that it's similar to what Ann Coulter said a long time ago. Ann Coulter had that quote about how, she'd take Bernie Sanders and socialism over what Trump's doing, because she was very upset that Trump didn't build the wall. And this was like a year and a half ago. I did a video on it. These guys, I mean, it's funny to me how, like, if you watch Young Turks, if you watch Emma Vigeland, if you watch a lot of like the progressive outlets that are out there, you would get the sense that like Donald Trump was this extremely far right guy who's, shutting out all the immigrants and being super draconian and all this stuff. But then it's like, you watch the alt-right, you watch the far right that care about closing out immigrants, and they call Trump a cuck and all this stuff, and say that he's, a cuckservative. That's the term that they use. That's the term that they use for Charlie Kirk. It's the term they use for Ben Shapiro. And yet to Young Turks and all these other guys, those guys are Nazis. So
it's because nothing is ever enough. This is the thing that my takeaway on, how the far right has behaved. Nothing is ever enough for them. So when you're at the point where you're Donald Trump and you're ranting about a wall and you're presiding over the sort of the reintroduction of the private prison system into immigration management, and you're having like weird advisors that are putting out strange statements from Department of Homeland Security, and you've got like children in cages being subjected to ridiculous trauma that is completely unreasonable. Even that has not been enough for them. But then there's also the double whammy involved in this as well, which is that the fact that Nick Fuentes and all these people are essentially idolizing Joseph Stalin should be seen as a posthumous indictment of who Joseph Stalin was as a person. That his greatest fans are now apparently the far right.
The thing is, you see, I see communists posting this all the time. They always post art. You know how they'll post it in the sort of usual communist Soviet art style, but they'll show like a diversity of different races and religions, all sort of lining up for communism in sort of those like typical like communist art pieces, except he's like, that's not correct at all. There's a reason why people like Nick Fuentes still sort of admire Stalin in a way, and it's not because he liked diversity.
Joseph Stalin was white supremacist, low-key.
Yeah.
Well, not even low-key if you were in Russia. Maybe outside of Russia, he didn't seem that way as much.
Right. Well, it's just, it's so crazy because it's like, he's all about the SJWs and like how they're like, trying to control everything and they're all authoritarian. And it's like, wait a second, behind closed doors, you think Stalin is a cool guy, so why are you criticizing the SJW?
Exactly. And that's also the contradiction inherent in the way that the far right have been behaving as well, which is basically accusing your opponent of doing what you yourself intend to do, but worse.
Well, also just criticizing SJWs is just the poor man's way of getting popularity in just internet commentary. It's just what it's what Shoe on Head does. It's what Greg does, and it's what Nick Fuentes does.
And you're so right about that as well, because I mean, literally at some point, the whole dunking on SJWs thing became literally just like people scrolling through Tumblr and being like, oh, here's a 15-year-old that's saying something and exploring politics in a way that I'm not comfortable with, but we can weaponize that for clout. So here's a screen cap of a 15-year-old saying a thing online, and now we're going to have like a I don't know 55 minute stream on why you need to click subscribe immediately and like follow us down a far right hole.
There's a reason why Ben Shapiro doesn't even like when people post those like, oh, Ben Shapiro destroys like a weak college student in crutches or something like that, because it doesn't actually make his point, because usually he doesn't destroy people, he just makes his point very succinctly, and that's it. Whereas like the people like June and Nick Fuentes, when they actually do make fun of SJWs, it's just purely just for pointing and laughing.
Exactly. And also there's the whole frequent change of position thing that you see these kind of like clout farmers do as well, where you'll have someone like June, for example, who will come out at the beginning and be like, oh, I'm far right adjacent, like, you know, hanging out with Sargon of Akkad and all these other kind of weird people. And then later on, when that becomes completely untenable because they've all humiliated themselves, she'll then flip around the other way and be like, oh, now we're Bernie bros, and we're going to support that form of just wrecking systems. The only thing they seem to have in common when they're on one side or the other is basically the horseshoe seems to bend toward wreckage.
I think everyone's wearing horseshoes.
Oh man, I've just got a quote here, just to take a pause from this, just to go to Dr. Zaus in the chat here. He says, and he's quoting Richard Spencer, and I like how he terms him Democratic Socialists of America, Richard Spencer, because you can't tell them apart. He says, a nation based on freedom is just another place to go shopping. Again, with the whole capitalism equals Jews meme that they like to promote on the far right. So it's like, to Nick Fuentes, for example, he's fine with becoming a communist to own the SJW. So,
and I just want to highlight what
I want to criticize about that quotation as well is that many of these snappy quotes that they think are so wonderful, they almost speak from privilege as well. Because think about it this way: there are people all over the world who wish that their nation was a place they could go shopping.
Yes,
and these guys are just so used to that they don't even realize how good they have it.
Yeah, I just want to highlight quickly something that Gunshark said, and because he said Reese is like an anti-SJW as well. Yeah. But like, I acknowledge that. Like, even Kevin, you're an anti-SJW. But the whole point is, you don't just base your career on sitting around and just looking at those crazy blue-haired feminists, and that's more of the point.
Like there are people out there like Gad Sad and stuff who will tweet about this like it's 2015 or whatever. Owning the SJWs got old. Like, it's like the move on. Like, there are bigger issues. Like, my main issue is, my concern is fascist Russia, communist China, North Korea, Iran, all these countries. And there's a problem when the vast majority of those who are in the community that claim to be owning and dunking on the SJWs are totally cool and claim it's pilled to be a supporter of like Putin or Xi Jinping. I'm like, you know, at some point, I care more about owning the fifth columns and the haters and the traitors than I do SJWs. And it reminds me of this meme I made here of John Bolton, where he says, you know, STFU, fifth column. You know, that's my attitude now. It's the fifth columns that are the big problem. And sure, those guys would say, well, the SJWs are fifth columns because, you know, they're into communism or whatever. And it's like, yeah, a lot of them are genuinely, unironically into Marxist theory and stuff. But you heard it here, folks, just from Nick Fuentes. But, you know, a lot of those other guys keep their mask on. But a lot of them think like this. They're totally fine with actual communism, like state authoritarian communism. They just don't like that there's some like blue-haired people on college campuses that talk about like, I guess, like identity politics or whatever. And it's like, for me, the bigger issue is like communism in Asia is still a massive threat to democracy. and fascism in Europe is a massive threat to the West. So those are my big focuses. So.
Not only that, but I mean the alt-right. Well, the alt-right and these people on the far right have even managed to actually, create a situation where they've got Donald J. Trump in power in the presidency of the United States right now, and he's constantly dipping his head to Vladimir Putin whenever Putin picks up the phone. So again, in terms of priorities, do they want to argue with people with blue hair on college campuses, or do they want to address the fact that they have an actual lunatic installed in the White House?
Well, I mean, that's the other thing.
If this happened during the Cold War, just how incredibly out of human comprehension that would be.
Well, even Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter is somebody who I have no respect for at all. I've seen the videos of him palling around with Kim Il-sung where he's all smiles on his yacht and stuff. Meanwhile, people are getting taken to the back and gassed in North Korean gulags. I don't like Jimmy Carter, but even Jimmy Carter did stand up to the Soviets in the Middle East to some extent. So it's Donald Trump, on the other hand, the problem is, in my case, I'm more nuanced. I try to be more nuanced than just I'm an anti-SJW or I'm anti-Trump. I'm not anti-Trump. In fact, I want to give Trump more credit. I'd rather Trump win. I want Trump to stand up for American interests, stand up for Western interests. I want him to get tough on Iran, and I want him to be successful in it. My problem is that when Trump has taken the advice of people like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and stuff, his administration has acted in a way that wouldn't look that much dissimilar from George W. Bush. My problem is when Trump goes and listens to Tucker Carlson or Vladimir Putin speeches and stuff, and he believes it gullibly. I don't like that, but I'm not a never Trumper. I'm not an orange band bad. I want to give him credit for stuff. So
I think it's a case where he is constantly in flux because he has no. I guess he has a few established positions, but on everything else, he can be swung one way or the other. And so I get the impression that on the things that you perhaps liked about his administration so far, those are things where certain individuals have had to go and have sit down conversations with him and talk to him, and also to make sure that they are the last people to have spoken to him before he made his announcement or issued the order, etc., in order to get what they wanted done. But then it's kind of like rolling a dice. Will it be you that gets to talk to him, or will it be smackhead from a couple doors down who's going to come in and say, actually, Trump, you should do this dumb thing instead. Or listen directly to Putin. I mean, he was even told. I mean, even on security, he was told at the beginning of his presidency that he couldn't use that civilian phone that he had brought into the White House with him because of the fact that there are IMSI catchers arranged all around Washington, D.C., being operated by various countries, including Russia, China, and possibly even Iran, that are essentially trying to listen in on cell phone signals and capture what is being said. That Trump still continues to this day to use that civilian phone to call Sean Hannity on random days in the week, and he discusses everything, including foreign policy, domestic policy, all kinds of stuff across that completely unsecured line. And then they had something where they were going up a tree or something, and they found IMSI catchers were in a tree near Pennsylvania freaking Avenue, and he's still using that damn phone. So I mean, his adversaries know the inside of his thought process at this point. Every day he sits in that office, people in Russia and China know what they're dealing with because they've heard his most inner thoughts expressed to Sean Hannity.
I think the other thing that's kind of scary too, that it's when it comes to Fox, I guess, well, maybe not scary, but it's definitely a turn of events, with Tucker Carlson. He has, I think, over 4.4 million views as of the last month or so. I think it's the second highest rated special program on Fox News.
Yeah.
He gets hundreds of thousands weekly, people who watch his stuff. So he clearly does have a lot of influence, and he's not really too far behind Sean Hannity. Not very far behind, and that's kind of strange.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be next level scary if we find out that Trump has been having private personal conversations on an unsecured line with Tucker Carlson as well.
Well, it's almost already happened. I mean, I believe that him talking with Tucker Carlson was the reason why he pulled back U.S. forces right when they were ready to retaliate after the drone was struck down, because Tucker Carlson is, he's a mask on type of Nick Fuentes type, where he often spends his whole segments praising Democrats like Ilhan Omar and Elizabeth Warren and stuff for their foreign policy and their stance on Israel and everything. And it's like, this is a guy who used to be quite close to a lot of the neoconservatives like Bill Kristol and stuff, and he's just gone full edgelord now, so.
I also see someone in the chat is mentioning that the president was literally cheerleading QAnon protests. And of course, QAnon being that conspiracy theory thing that's been going on. And I assume what he's referring to is is those weird tweets he wrote where he said, like, what was it? Free Minnesota, was it? And free Virginia and free insert name of American state here. I can't remember all of them. And this was like in response to these like weird protests where people were coming out with signs and stuff and essentially blocking off roads and saying that they wanted to not be in a lockdown. They wanted to just go outside and do whatever they wanted, which of course would spread COVID-19 even further and cripple the US economy in the long term. So I don't know why they would want to do that. And then the president comes out and says, oh yeah, totally do that. At that point, on that day, I'll tell you how the reaction, because I think a lot of people don't watch Chinese social media to find out what the reactions were. I looked on Bilibili during that whole saga when Trump started posting those tweets. Now, I don't know if you guys have seen this meme. It's a meme. It's a meme involving Ghanaian funeral pallbearers, and what they do is they put the coffin on their shoulders and they dance with the coffin, right? What was being posted on Bilibili in China when that was happening was people were making adaptations of this meme where the United States of America was in the coffin, and every single Ghanaian pallbearer that's dancing is actually the face of Donald Trump. And then, like the text they were overlaying over it was something that I would roughly translate as basically, Donald Trump may as well be a Chinese agent for all the work he is doing.
Oh wow!
I was blown away when I saw these memes coming out. I was like, they're literally in China laughing at him.
The only thing I will say about the protest is the protest one. I never get why protesters all like, if you're trying to make a point that you're going to be responsible when the economy's opened up, I don't know why they all form into packs to protest. Like if they did a social distance protest, it would be far more effective. But to be fair to the protesters, the protests are not happening in like New York State where the COVID virus has hit pretty hard. It's usually in the very spread out, undense states that there's not really that. There's like COVID's not really hit them that hard. It's like if Wyoming opened up, like, well, I guess that might suck, but people in Wyoming don't see another person for 10 days.
Yeah, but that can ramp up. That can ramp up pretty quickly though, because again, it's an exponential growth curve, right? So if they're going to come out and protest to say they want to come out because they've only got, let's say, hypothetically, they've got 50 cases. Once they've opened up, it'll be very fast.
They don't want to fully open up. They tend to just want to be able to do like reasonable things, like I want to be able to go to a laundromat or something like that.
Right. Well, I think the other thing is I know in my state in particular, like 2 weeks ago, they were only in their cars for the first protest, but the one I just saw from yesterday, there was like 100 people like crammed inside the Capitol building, and I'm just thinking to myself, like, guys, like, okay, yes, I get it that like you want more, I guess, like, freedom or whatever to do what you want. But at the same time, you guys can all get sick. You're all packed into one room.
Yeah. You guys need a PR team.
Not only that, there was a guy running around. I don't know if you've seen this footage. There was like some guy running around with like this Alex Jones stuff or something, like telling people that he wanted them to cough in his mouth and et cetera, like to demonstrate that he's not afraid of the virus. And he was going around hugging people and all kinds of madness. I couldn't believe that.
Oh, man.
Another one I saw earlier on today as well was this was on BBC News, where the newsreader unfortunately had to like read out this news, and so she's basically reading out this news, and she gets to the part where Donald Trump declares that he wants to have rallies with 25,000 people starting next week. And you could actually see her visibly pause for a moment before reading it. Like she looks at the camera like, is this actually like what I'm actually seeing here? And then she had to read it out. Like no one in the world can believe that he's actually going to have rallies with 25,000 people attending in like key battleground states starting next week.
Well, I think the thing about Trump is he says a lot of stuff and then he ends up reneging on it later because what he said, like his first impression about everything is always the stupidest thing possible. And again, usually one of his advisors gets to him and beats him over the head with the fact it's a bad idea. So it usually never happens at very least.
You'll better hope the advisors get to him before next week, because I mean that is an idea that is so dumb it's beyond comprehension.
No,
and the person who put it to him said, "Are you going to have social distancing?" They said, "Are you going to have social distancing at the rallies?" And Trump even responded to that and said, "No, we're not going to have people sitting 6 seats apart and so on, because that doesn't look so good in the camera shot." And I'm thinking, Really? So are Trump supporters going to be willing to essentially put themselves at mortal risk in order to make sure that Trump can get the best camera shot at the rally?
Well, I mean, a lot of them have said, if he did shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, and he said it himself that they'd still vote for him. But, it really kind of begs the question, well, what if he shot you on Fifth Avenue? Would you still vote for him? And a lot of them would say, yeah, they'd take a bullet for the team. It's like that death kitsch sort of thing. Like, we're willing to die for the leader.
There was a guy on Fox News that did that as well, wasn't there? One where they asked him, would you be willing to die in order to get the economy reopened again? And he said something like, "We've got to defend America by being willing to contract COVID-19 and die," or whatever. And I was like, I can't believe that he believes that.
Oh,
but I mean, yeah, there was at least one person on Fox News who said that.
Well,
of course, I think that guy
comes down
actually mean it. He meant it for everyone else except himself, of course, I'm sure.
Yeah, it comes down to being Trump being reelected. So if the economy's good, they view it in their eyes that Trump's going to be reelected. And it's good for Fox News if Trump is reelected. It's probably good for them if a Democrat gets reelected, because then they have a serial party, but that's what they're looking at. So if the economy goes in the tank, Trump's probably not going to be reelected. So that's what in my mind, that's what it comes down to, is they want the economy to open back up. It doesn't matter how many people die. It's about Trump getting reelected, so then they stay in charge, they stay in power, and they stay relevant. Because when Obama was president, Fox News wasn't allowed in a bunch of events because they'd write adversarial news about Obama,
Yeah.
So it's kind of that thing. So it's more of kind of the politics.
Are they basically worried that Biden's going to repeat the same thing and just block them from events?
Although Biden's trying as hard as possible not to win the presidency as he possibly can.
He's playing on ultimate hard mode. Like the one I saw from the other day, this thing on Twitter where he quoted Hillary Clinton and then said, "I'm with her." Ultimate hard mode. Like, he's playing with like handicaps on, right? It's just unbelievable. I couldn't believe that.
Well, all you have to do is just say, I'm friends with Obama, then like the crowd goes wild. That's all you got to say.
Yeah. I mean, I think for his own marketing sake, I personally like Hillary Clinton, but I understand that she has a very big disapproval rating. We were talking about this on last stream. I think he's better to go in the direction of Barack Obama's legacy, even though I got a lot of issues with his legacy, and his legacy is almost non-existent now because Trump ripped up the Iran deal, which again, I support him on. And in fairness to Trump here, I think he would have done that regardless of what anybody told him to do. That was genuinely something that he was going to do. That was a big piece of his campaign, and he delivered on it. And so, I try to be fair here. And I see a lot of people in the mainstream media where they're very tough and critical of Putin and Russia right now. But I guarantee you that if like a neoconservative came into power, somebody like Bolton, and started talking tough about Putin, they'd all flip overnight and say, "Oh, he's trying to start World War III. We need to get along with Russia. Vote Democrat." Because it's all about partisanship for them. It's not about the issues, right? It's not about.
Although luckily, when I look at Joseph Biden's platform, there's nothing in Biden's platform which indicates he intends to continue the softness on Russia that has been going on so far. Like, I think he does take this thing super seriously. I mean, particularly since he was at ground zero when the whole thing of John Podesta getting hacked and Hillary getting hacked and all of this kicked off. I don't think that Joseph Biden will be soft on them at all.
The only thing I would say on Trump's record on Russia is verbally, the way he treats Russia verbally when he talks about Putin, when he talks about Russia, that's been basically like letter grade wise, it's been a D to an F. But on the actual ground in places like Georgia and Ukraine, he's done a far better job at actually supplying those countries with military equipment than Obama ever did. I think he significantly raised, I think maybe even more than doubled the actual military supplies that those two countries are getting. And if you actually listen to the press in those two countries, they were actually praising him for it. So I do agree that he has to really shut up whenever he starts praising random dictators, because the thing is that it makes it hard to actually use that military equipment he gives to those countries later down the line if he might accidentally hesitate to use it because he has some stupid personal relationship with a dictator that the dictator doesn't even freaking value.
Well, before we get into the next clip though, and I've got a few more to get into, when the next one's the Tucker Carlson one, I do just want to say though, because one of the big sort of elephants in the room right here, I'm sure a lot of people would be wondering about, is that there was a lot of allegations that were out that Trump had withheld aid from, or threatened to withhold aid in terms of military supplies from Ukraine until basically in exchange for he would only release the aid if the government of Ukraine agreed to launch a political investigation into Hunter Biden's operations with an oil company there. What do you make of that?
That was exactly true, and it's totally how that went down. And the only reason it didn't end in complete tragedy was because I think civil servants in the U.S. have been working overtime to try to mitigate some of these bad impulses. I mean, even on day one, I don't know if anyone even remembers this, but like on day one when he became president, the first thing that civil servants in the United States were faced with was that they had to find a way to prevent Trump from immediately removing sanctions from Russia. Because that was what they were intending to do. There was an immediate push on day one of the presidency to move in that direction. And civil servants and people in the State Department had to basically come out and do tricks, for lack of a better way of describing it, to slow that down and make sure that they were frustrated in their attempt to move in that direction. So I think that Trump's bad impulses are strong. The only thing that's preventing it from becoming like universally bad in all cases is that he still has to interact with the rest of the US government, and there are many elements within that government that don't want him to be able to do these ridiculous things. And so, like, if it were up to Trump, everything that we thought that was bad that was going to happen would have happened. But luckily, he is not literally a dictator, and so he's unable to advance forward on some of the more ridiculous ideas he had so far.
Right. I just want to get, the thing is, it's like, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I would only say that there is an exception, which is the Iranian regime right now. But I've said before to Reese that I think, if he were to meet the Ayatollah in person, he might also fall in love with the Ayatollah. But at least up until now, his rhetoric on Iran has, for the most part, been agreeable to me. But on every other region and power.
I think from what I was told from one of my friends from Iran was that it's like he wanted to meet Rouhani, but the Ayatollah refused to actually meet with Trump because he said like, don't meet with Trump. You're not allowed to do that. So Trump has wanted to meet with Rouhani, but that was not allowed to happen from what I've been told. And I feel like you would want to meet one of those leaders at least. I mean, if it's not the president, the supreme leader, you would absolutely want to at least meet one of them for sure.
Right. Well, I wanted to get Wyatt's response to the Hunter Biden blackmail allegations, because of course Mitt Romney in the Senate voted to impeach him over that. But what do you make of that incident?
Well, it wasn't an impeachable offense because there's already a political mechanism to restoring aid that's withheld. The thing is that there's an actual, like, if you look it up, sorry, I'm gonna have to be Chank and say Google it, but there is an actual like an official process where the House can force aid to be put through even if the president refuses to put it through. And honestly, I think the whole thing that sort of gets lost in all of this and that people don't really bring up enough is that even though he shouldn't have withheld the aid and was stupid to do that, because he could have just probably gotten President Zelensky to agree to like lower corruption anyways, is that in the election, Biden is going to have to deal with the corruption issues with him and Hunter. I don't think that should be lost just because Trump also did something stupid.
Right. Well, I mean, realistically speaking, in terms of the media apparatus and everything, that will be an issue that the Republicans will hype up. But, I'm not 100% certain as to how well that's going to go over, because I feel like it will work to appeal to their base, but it's not going to win over any Democrats, because it's just going to remind them of the allegations that were pending against the Trump administration. So, because a lot of people see it as a partisan sort of thing. For me, based on what I've seen, it seems pretty apparent to me that Trump meant to apply pressure in exchange for a political investigation there. I don't know too much about how he's handled things with respect to Georgia, but I know that some of the people around him, especially John Bolton there, it used to be in there, McMaster, obviously Pompeo, those guys as a part of the administration, they are clear in upholding American interests. So the administration as a whole has been a mixed bag in my view. It's just I would largely count Trump himself in the negative side of things at the end of the day. But, he did at least put people around him that were pretty reasonable on a lot of stuff. So,
I think that's fair with the partisanship thing, where it's like the Hunter Biden thing is probably going to get covered up by Trump's withholding of aid. So I guess it's probably just a draw at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's a draw, I think, because if Republicans bring it up, it'll appeal to their base, but it'll turn off Democrats. And if Democrats bring it up, it'll appeal to their base, but it won't convince any Republicans. Like the narrative is basically it's split right now. And
I did have one thing to say on that whole Ukraine thing. I think one of the big things why maybe I guess a lot of people don't care about it as much is because it's going on in another country. Right, because if you look at like Watergate, like that happened here in the U.S. Like, I think the thing is when it comes to Ukraine, a lot of voters don't really care because it's too complicated of a situation as it is. Like, it's hard to describe the situation as in like just like one or two sentences. Like, you really have to like wind it out a little bit with somebody. I don't think like the average voter really understands what went on with Ukraine, to be totally frank, because they're not really like that in tune with politics as it is, and I don't think they would be that deeply invested on like what happened in Ukraine. Like that's just the way I see it.
I think, Anthony, I think you're right on that. That foreign policy is never really the main focus, at least since the Cold War. And it's unfortunate because it's allowed our enemies to really get an upper hand. Well, we're all not really paying too much attention. But with that all being said, I do want to go to the next clip here. This one is a Tucker Carlson clip. We're just going to watch this. It's a couple minutes long.
Since 9/11, the U.S. has spent trillions of dollars and thousands of American lives trying to remake the Middle East in our image. It's sad to say it out loud, but we have to. It hasn't worked. Many of us thought it would, but it hasn't. By every measure, our foreign wars have ended in dismal failure for the United States, however noble their intentions, and some did have noble intentions. Donald Trump was one of the rare Republican politicians honest enough to admit this. He said it out loud 3 years ago and promised not to repeat the same mistakes if elected president. And partly because he said that, he was elected president. Now something fascinating is happening. The very people, in some cases literally the same people, who lured us into the Iraq quagmire 16 years ago, are demanding a new war, this one with Iran. The president, to his great credit, appears to be skeptical of this, very skeptical. Iran recently downed an unmanned American drone. The president, speaking today, seemed to suggest this shouldn't necessarily trigger a conflict with Iran. Watch.
Iran made a big mistake. This drone was in international waters. Clearly, we have it all documented. I would imagine it was a general or somebody that made a mistake in shooting that drone down. And fortunately, that drone was unarmed. It was not, there was no man in it, and there was no, it was over international waters, clearly over international waters, but we didn't have a man or woman in the drone. We had nobody in the drone. Are you still open? Would have made a big difference. Let me tell you, would have made a big difference. I find it hard to believe it was intentional, if you want to know the truth. I think that it could have been somebody who was loose and stupid that did it.
So that's not nearly bellicose enough for the permanent foreign policy establishment in Washington, many of whom crave a war with Iran and see every provocation as an opportunity to start one. Senator Lindsey Graham, for example, says Americans ought to be ready to fight and die for shipping lanes on the other side of the world. Watch.
So here's what to watch for. If the Iranians follow through on their threat to start enriching again at higher levels, to basically take their enrichment program to a kind of a nuclear level in terms of a weapons grade production, Israel's in a world of hurt. So the best thing the president can do is stop that. And how do you stop that? To make Iran understand you're not going to let that happen. I think he should put their oil refineries on a target list, that he should look at sinking the Iranian Navy if they attack shipping again.
So in Washington, there are no real consequences for being wrong, and as a result, policymakers are. They make the same mistakes again and again. And it's certainly not just Lindsey Graham. At the New York Times, left-wing warmonger Bret Stephens is also calling on America to sink the Iranian Navy. Many on the left are for it. John Bolton cheers him on from within the White House. Bill Kristol nods with approval from outside the White House. None of these people will admit their actual intentions. They'll tell you they don't really want a war with Iran. That's a crock. They want a war badly. badly enough to lie about it. That's why they're putting American troops into situations where conflict is inevitable in order to start a war. Everyone in Washington knows exactly what's happening. They've seen it many times before.
What the hell? He doesn't want a war so bad that he lied about what John Bolton and Bill Kristol thought. He lied about them lying.
I think what's kind of funny is Trump said it was a drone, and then he went on to say that there's no man or woman in it. It's a drone. There's not supposed to be a person.
Yeah, no, I thought that too.
That was kind of funny.
I just gotta say here, that man there, Tucker Carlson, that you just watched, again, to the viewers, imagine you didn't know who Tucker Carlson was. Imagine you didn't know, Fox News or whatever. You just watching this clip or whatever. You would think that this is like a more mature version of, a more professional version of Kyle Kulinski or Jimmy Dore. Like his rhetoric right there. This man used to be friendly and in close circles with the neocons. And now he's become a paleo moron who would rather Iran basically take over the Middle East, because that would make the world so much safer, And a final point before we go back to the panel, this whole argument of, oh, well, there wasn't anybody on board, nobody died, so therefore is it really an act of war? Imagine Iran just took down the American power grid. Just like destroyed it with cyber warfare and just took America out of energy for no more electricity for 2 years. But hey, nobody died in the attacks. Nobody died in the attacks or anything. Sure, people might die as a consequence or whatever, but nobody died in the attacks. It's not like they did Pearl Harbor and killed people. Why should we go to war with them? The point here is that you can do an act of war without killing anybody. Many things count as an act of war. Sabotage is an act of war. So shooting down at military aircraft over international waters is an act of war. That's not up for debate.
Also, it's just like the thing is, John Bolton himself was not arguing for full out war with Iran. They were just thinking to sink they make it sound dramatic by sink the entire Iranian Navy. It's like 5 boats. We're just going to sink 5 of their ships. It's nothing. The whole point is that they hit a drone, so showing that they're willing to be aggressive. And the thing is that you have to pound them into the floor to make sure that they never try that again. It's like the whole point is that like when they hit you, you have to hit them back harder to make sure that they don't think that they can handle it next time. Like you have to make the cost of them attacking an American asset worse for them in retroactively.
Oh, for sure,
Devil's
for sure.
advocate here, though.
Yeah.
Devil's advocate, which is basically how do you know where the escalation ends? For example, they hit your drone, you hit their 5 warships. They then respond by doing some nonsense in Bahrain, for example, which is where the 5th Fleet is actually stationed. And then somehow you end up with the whole strait being closed down. But then 54% of energy that heads toward East Asia has to pass through that strait, which then results in energy prices spiking, and then the price of everything in Walmart goes up. And then
I know where that ends. I know where that ends. That ends with a mass deployment of troops to the region and new forward deployment of naval assets, and hopefully a coalition of forces with Canada, the United Kingdom, to take out the Iranian regime and liberate the country. That's what I would do. So,
wouldn't this lend to the view then? And I mean, no one intends to defend Tucker Carlson here, but wouldn't this lend to the view that some of the hyperventilating involved with where this could hypothetically end up would in fact be a war?
Oh, but what's wrong with that? I've said on the channel before. I believe that war with Iran is necessary.
Sure, I mean, okay, yes, but I mean, how many fronts can you actually be engaged on at the same time? Because I mean, if you're already needing to deal with Crimea, and you've already got Libya, and you've already also got Syria, so that's, let's say, 3 fronts, and then you've got the pivot in Asia that you want to do. So you want to make sure that China can't, go out of the bounds in the South China Sea. Then you've got 4 different zones that you're dealing with there.
But Saudi Arabia would do most of the work. Saudi Arabia would do most of the work in fighting Iran, though. The United States, Canada, and whatnot would almost be secondary forces in most of the conflict. Most of it would be directed through Saudi and the Gulf states. The thing is...
So, to me, I would say to that for the drone, I guess a more proportionate response would be take out whatever took out the drone, right? Like if there was some kind of SAM battery emplacement or something like that they had on the coast, you would just take that out as like a limited retaliatory attack.
Like,
I would say that you always have to do a bit more, or they
if
can
you
be
hit the thing
accountants
they
about
hit
it.
you with, then I can imagine that would lead to less escalation than if you just hit something random in response to it.
Well, here's the escalation. Here's the ultimate escalation if we don't do anything. Eventually, they will have a nuclear weapon, and the escalatory actions at that point are unthinkable once Israel's wiped off the map. It's unacceptable because it's only a matter of time. I made this point about North Korea too. It's a false premise to say that we can choose between peace and war. The only choice is between war now and have X amount of people die, or war in 10 years on their terms and have 10X people die. I'd rather do the war now. That's my
here's the issue with Iran too, is that when you actually do retaliate, one, you don't want to just take out like a 1-for-1 sort of exchange, or the Iranians can then calculate that in. They can say, well, we hit their drone, I can afford a drone to make myself look good in front of my people. And you can't take out a SAM battery, because a SAM battery is not exactly gonna be like in the middle of somewhere where the Iranian public would know that they were hit and beat by the Americans. You have to sink something that the Iranians can't cover up. Like, you can't cover up 5 ships at dock being taken out. You have
you're right. That cost benefit analysis. I just want to say I made this point before in my video responding to when Iran attacked the Abqaiq oil refinery, the largest in the world in Saudi Arabia. I said, they cost benefit analysis what they were going to be able to get away with all of this, because Trump has talked about proportionality. I've talked about it on the program before, and this is probably one of the most controversial views of mine. I don't believe in proportional response. I think that proportional response is dumb. I think if the enemy attacks you, it's not their place to say, oh, we killed 5,000 of your people at Pearl Harbor, therefore you can kill 5,000 of ours. I'm of the view, if they kill 5,000 at Pearl Harbor, you can go ham. You can nuke all their cities, that you can nuke all their bases. Like that, they started the war. That's what war is. That's what total war is. So,
Well, I think one thing though, when it comes to more proportionate response, especially if it's like a very specific like targeted military action, it's less controversial too. Like, because it's like like when Trump was talking about like the cultural sites, or whatever. Like I know nothing ever happened, but I think like optics wise, like if you keep the targets more limited, it's better for you politically speaking. And,
it might be better politically.
That's the reason I mentioned that. The reason I mentioned that proportionality is also because of the fact that you have to convince your own population that what you're doing is right, and also have your allies not turn around and condemn you. Because now you've mentioned that, yes, when Trump responded that time with the hitting of cultural sites thing, that looked really bad. Like I didn't know anyone who thought that was like a strong pose that he took on there. It looked like he was acting out of weakness, because who says, "Oh, we're going to hit your cultural sites"?
Well, that's just what ISIS does to look powerful. Too. Like, you have to take out something powerful with your own power, and that when I'd say, like, I'm in a certain favor of proportional responses, but the proportional response should not be 1-to-1. It's like you should always be hitting them back 150%.
Well, I understand you on the issue of basically showing dominance when you hit back. So when you talk about proportionality, when I talk about proportionality at least, it doesn't mean hit them back with exactly the thing that they hit you with. You always have to add on a little bit extra to say, okay, I can go a little bit further. But like, in terms of what a little bit further is, I would not say that like a little bit further would be you sink their entire fleet, because then you've essentially put their back against the wall and dared them to initiate the thing against you immediately.
But my point was their fleet is so small that the whole sinking of it wasn't actually that big a deal. If it was another country, if you took out 3 ships, that's fine.
Yeah, but the thing they always say when they're dealing with this kind of thing is that what may not be a big deal in our conception might be a very big deal to them, because obviously for us it's like, well, there's only 5 ships, bro, right? Whereas for them, if that's their entire fleet, then they will still say to themselves, well, our entire fleet has been sunk, so it would be a very big deal for them, and then they would respond back with something even bigger.
Well, but this views the downing of the drone in a microcosm as if this were an isolated event. They've had a 40-year track record of undermining American interests in the region, terrorizing the region. Soleimani was responsible for the deaths of around 400,000 people in the region in order to propagate the Iranian Empire in the Middle East. They are consistently anti-American. They've been on the record for over 10 years that their objective is to get a nuclear bomb, and once they have it, they want to destroy Israel. They are. I'm of the opinion that when a dictatorship tells you their intentions, you should probably believe them.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that.
I think that again, when it comes to all of this, I understand that you have to sell things politically. There was a time in American history and Western history when the idea of massive retaliation was popular. The idea that you keep the peace by having the enemy know that if they think that they can just sink one of your boats, that they're not going to be completely wiped off the map. That if you say to them, if you make it clear, hey, look, if you sink our aircraft carrier, we send over 1,000 nukes and destroy you. Well, now they're not going to hit your aircraft carrier. They're not even going to think about it. And so when you set up a circumstance where they can figure out, what percent are you going to retaliate by? Is it going to be 130%? Is it going to be 70%? It's like, no, I'm of the view that they should assume that they're not going to have a country left if they strike you. So,
well,
also,
maybe sorry. Well, I was just gonna say, well, maybe Soleimani was the response for the drone strike, right? Maybe he was like, "Hey, 6 months from now, we're gonna go do that," right? maybe that was his plan all along.
That was definitely a miscalculation by them as well. I mean, now that you get to it, because I'm assuming that Soleimani did not imagine that there would actually be a strike against his convoy. So his probable last thought on the whole issue, obviously, would have been something like, "Oh, so they're actually doing it then." Right? So, I mean, I do understand that sometimes overstepping the bounds and actually hitting someone like Soleimani, there can be a utility for that, because I think they were genuinely stunned by that, and additionally, they didn't even respond with anything substantial.
That was a good move too, because I think it understood the optic war that you have to fight against the Iranians, where the thing is, you can't hit the Iranians in certain ways where they can sort of slough it off and say, "Oh, we're still standing." You have to hit them in ways where their people understand, I'm going to resist, even like if there's a draft in Iran, I'm going to resist being part of that draft because I know we're just dead in the water already. That was a perfect one. Like we just took out your most important military asset. So
I think White had a good point too, that it shows that they're not invincible, right? Because like Soleimani was a big political leader, and to see him go in a flash, and not just him, but like 6 other important people, it shows that they're vulnerable.
Yeah,
like they're not the hot shit.
It's a pinprick attack, but it's also shattering at the same time in what it represents.
Yeah, it was a potential shatter point for them, because I mean, you saw how the protests went as well, and when the Iranians responded back, because it wasn't a shatter point in and of itself, but it was a shatter point because the response was bungled by the Iranians. So when they accidentally shot down the civilian airliner as their response, then it was like, not only were you weak and vulnerable, but then you also bungled the response and killed a bunch of civilians and people, people who everyone was waiting for to come back from these other countries from holiday and so on. All of them were suddenly taken out because the regime is so incompetent. And I think that double effect, the fact that it was both Soleimani being erased and then them bungling the response, that was a shatter point for them. I think for a lot of young people in Iran, it's never going to be the same again. I mean, you all saw the footage of where they have those things in the universities where you're supposed to walk across the American and the Israeli flag when you enter, and suddenly people started walking around the flag because they refused to step on them anymore.
Right. So Kevin, do you want your special guests pretty soon, or?
Well, if he's still up for it, we'll see. I do have a few more videos left. I'm going to go to the next video now, though. We've had an interesting discussion so far. Thanks again for the guests being here tonight, and thanks again for watching us tonight. We know you've got a wide array of choice to watch right now on Twitch and YouTube, but you choose to be here, so that's base. So thanks for watching. We have another clip now. This one is by, I believe it was Students for Tulsi, if I recall, this short clip.
Oh no! I think I know what you're gonna show.
Yeah, we're gonna watch some cringe. We're gonna watch some cringe. So brace for that, everybody.
Prepare yourself.
Bracing right now.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're still killing innocent kids.
So are they, and we're stopping them.
No, they're no.
They are.
They are.
98% of the people we've killed in the Middle East have been civilians.
What do you mean? 98%.
98% of the people that we've killed in the Middle East have been civilians.
Okay.
And ISIS and Al Qaeda have since we've been in the Middle East, Al Qaeda and ISIS numbers have grown. So
man, that kid.
Talking points.
That kid is way too that kid was way too respectful to say that she's an absolute like brain donor. So you can just tell me just like, I don't know if I'm supposed to call you an idiot right now or not.
Here's the
98%, dude. It's 98%.
Actually,
it's literally impossible.
If you put that 98% under Bashar al-Assad, I would probably agree with you.
I mean, think about it. 98%. Think about what a brainlet talking point that is. 98%.
Oh, I love the arrogance behind it. She was like, "Oh, it's 98%." And ISIS and the Taliban have grown since we went in there. Also, when were the Taliban in Syria? Just wondering.
They don't know anything, man. They don't know anything. They don't know anything. All that they know.
They once read a Yahoo Answers, and now they know everything.
Yeah. All that they know is that there are brown people in the Middle East. Like to them, to the Tulsi Gabbard fans, they're just all brown, and yet they accuse us of being Orientalist because we want to end the dictatorships in the region. But
also, when did this clip happen? Was this clip actually taken after Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi had already been killed?
I'm pretty sure this is recent because the students for Tulsi page posted this pretty soon.
So how can she be claiming that ISIL has grown when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead? They are completely scattered. Raqqa has been essentially pounded into the ground. They're all scattered all over the place. People can't even remember who the leader of ISIL is on any given day anymore.
Because the Putin and Assad regimes have labeled everybody that disagrees with them to be ISIS, so that's how they've grown. Because
and even to be fair, if when she mentioned the Taliban, if she was sort of also alluding to the intervention into Afghanistan, it's like, well, no, you're wrong. Like again,
exactly.
The Taliban was like ISIS.
Not the government of Afghanistan, right?
Yeah,
they have objectively shrunk.
Yeah, they don't own the entire territories and tax people with their own government systems. They now sit in caves.
Also, technically speaking, Afghanistan is Central Asia. It's not the Middle East.
Exactly. I love pointing out how people get so mad.
Yeah, so like,
you're right. No, it's funny. They don't know Jack. All that they know is that there's brown people over there and USA bad, and yet they accuse us of being Orientalists that just think of, oh, we need to, subjugate or objectify or fetishize the brown.
I bet if you put it to them this way, that their argument about like their perspective on the Middle East would literally mean that China borders the Middle East. And I bet if you told them that, they'd be like, "No, that's stupid. That's absurd." And you're like,
no. They would think it was true. They would think it was true. They don't have a BS detector. Their BS detector was made in China, man.
Yeah, I even had someone try to tell me the other day that like Pakistan is part of the Middle East, and I'm just like, no, it isn't. It's in South Asia.
Well, clearly they're right. It has stand in the title.
Right. Well, the other thing what's weird is that it's like, does she mean like the Levant? Does she mean like just Southwest Asia? Does she mean Northern Africa? Like, what does she mean by 95%?
No, she said 98%. She just means it all, man. Like, I've got a meme of like Iraqistan kids, like Bush lied and killed 1 million Iraqistan kids. Like, that's the Michael Moore meme. They don't know. They don't know any of the nuance. They don't know the different political ideologies. They don't know the different ethnic groups. They don't know anything. To them, it's all just browns. And as Colin Kaepernick said, what does the American government like to do? Bomb brown bodies in the Middle East. I'm quoting him.
Well, wait a second, Kevin. Iraqistan, I mean, under Saddam, it probably killed 1 million people, so you're right there.
Well, I mean, Iraqistan, see, that's the thing. It's like Iraqistan, it's like, it's 50% Afghanistan, 50% Iraq, 50% brown, It's like the South Park game. Like, these people don't know. These people don't know anything. And then they have the gall and the nerve and the audacity to call the neocons Orientalists.
Also, the other thing that I found completely frustrating about engaging with like certain segments of the American left on these issues, since Afghanistan was mentioned, people talking about how you need to remove everything from Afghanistan apparently in order for freedom to happen. And I'm thinking, do you guys know what the definition of freedom is? Given that if there was a complete removal of all security forces from Afghanistan before the mission has been accomplished, right? Like just total surrender, right? In what environment do they imagine that a left-wing party could re-emerge?
Well, the other thing is that it's
everyone would be dead.
Right.
They don't. It's all America bad.
Well,
USA bad, USA bad, neocons bad, Hawks bad.
Well, their arguments are the woke racist arguments where they pretend like, well, they can't be truly free until America pulls out all their troops, as if all these brown people, like, oh, they're just brown people, they can't handle having military troops around. They'll just fly off the handle and start trying to like throw bombs at them. It's just like, or maybe they're just people.
And here's the other thing too.
Like,
a lot of the fighters are foreign fighters, like what went into Iraq or Afghanistan. Like, and actually, Henry talks about this. A lot of people in Afghanistan who are like the Taliban, they're not even Afghani origin. They're like from Pakistan.
Not even from Afghanistan.
They're not even from the country. It's like It's like the civilian population doesn't have the same kind of like trigger. I guess they're not really triggered by us. It's really people from other nations that are pissed by us. You know. So I've always found that weird.
No,
I mean, some of the fighters in Afghanistan were even were people who had like snuck out of Iran for that specific purpose. I mean, this is one of those weird cases where you had like triangulations of like enemy of your enemy of your enemy kind of thing going on. Where I mean, there was even the thing with the Uyghurs from China, for example, where China had to like arrest people who were returning from Afghanistan because they were essentially just the people that Al Qaeda had recruited in the middle of Xinjiang province. Right? So again, one of those weird things where enemy of your enemy of your enemy of your enemy ends up arresting your other enemy. Right? It's just unbelievable stuff. But if you address the Tulsi kids on this, they literally can't conceptualize how you can have a war in which there are so many different groups of people all converged on one location, and that if you were to like remove one segment of that arrangement, everything changes in ways that you can't even anticipate. Removing the United States and NATO in general from the center of the Afghanistan war, it changes the entire play. It changes the entire state of play in ways that are difficult to predict, but all the options then become bad because it's just different flavors of Islamism that end up erupting in that location. Liberals get destroyed, feminists get destroyed, socialists get destroyed, etc. And it's completely ridiculous. There are people who are calling themselves leftists who seem to want that outcome to happen in Afghanistan, which is a crossroads between Central Asia and South Asia.
In fairness to Tulsi, though, most of her supporters are like libertarian or right wing. You know, I don't know that girl there. She could have been alt-right. I don't know. She struck me as kind of progressive-y, but you don't know with Tulsi because Tulsi's been on the record before saying that that homosexuality is terrorism and stuff, and she's like Hindu nationalism and stuff. So you know,
I felt really bad for that kid who's debating her, because I've seen this so many times, and especially just debates around universities where people just assert things and they clearly don't know what they're talking about, but people are too polite to call them out. And that's sort of the problem with arguing foreign policy, is because these like left-wing hacks keep sort of asserting that race has everything to do with it. Then these people sort of clam up and they won't debate them, even though these people are the actual racists who are claiming that, well, no, they like the Taliban because the Taliban are in power, so that these people must deserve to live under them. It's like,
oh yes,
you're a horrifyingly terrible person.
I've had people on my campus before, my former campus, to basically say, you know, you are a white supremacist and all this stuff because I supported taking out Saddam Hussein. And you're like, it goes back to this meme I have on the screen right now of the Edward Said, where, you know, I'm paraphrasing his entire career's work, where it's just brown people deserve to live under brutal despots. That's their culture, bro. Liberating them would be Orientalism and imperialism, bruh. And that's what these people think. Like, they really genuinely think that, you know, it's their culture. They're Westphalian at their core. They don't understand that America being in the region makes the world a better place. They talk all the time about how, you know, they want to make the world a better place. They want to do their activism. They want to, speak truth to power, but they have no idea that the power in the region is actually the, you know, anti-American. Like they're bootlicking. I mean, they'll call me a bootlicker, of course, and they'll call me a racist and everything, because I'm not down with Assad, I'm not down with Saddam, I'm not down with the Taliban. But it's like, those guys are the establishment in those regions, not the Taliban anymore. Thankfully, they're only 13% of the country now, but they soon will be the establishment if America finishes pulling out. So,
well, I don't want the Taliban.
No, you go.
Well, I mean, sorry. Well, I don't want the Taliban to be the establishment of freaking Afghanistan, because then they'll kill all the minority ethnic groups there. And it's like, you know, it's like these people claim they want to care about ethnic groups and all these like little things going on, and that's fine. You know, it's respectable. But it's like all these people are gonna get wiped out by the Taliban. They're a pretty racist organization, and nobody realizes that.
For sure. They would do an ethnic genocide.
Different ethnic groups that they would be resuming their targeting against. And also, it speaks to a failure of history because, I mean, there are plenty of people on the left who correctly criticize the United States because of the fact that they allowed the Mujahideen to win in Afghanistan at that particular time, and then they kind of stood back and let Pakistan do its strategic depth operation, which resulted in the rise of the Taliban in that location. So that's obviously a massive problem. When the United States shows up to actually fix that problem by blowing them the hell away, why would they complain at this point? I mean, I didn't complain. I was like, oh, so the US wants to actually clean up its own mess. Go right ahead. Go right ahead, right? That was my stance. I don't understand why so many people on the left can't also arrive at that same stance, which is, okay, if the US wants to clean up its own mess, let them do it.
Well, also
that's like what Christopher Hitchens said about Saddam. He's obviously, he was very left-wing, and he used a lot of Marxist language, but he basically spoke about how everything that the US ever did with Iran, or with Iraq rather, was a function of imperialism. And he said, you know, going in and taking out Saddam was finally just cleaning up a long mess, basically. And yet for all these people, they don't believe in taking responsibility for your actions and cleaning up the mess. They'll say America made it a problem, but then when you say, so therefore should America clean it up? If you want to phrase
exactly.
These are also the
Kevin, sorry, I'm gonna go send them the link now, real quick.
We got a couple more videos. If he comes in, we will not be able to get through.
Let him react to the videos too. I want to see their perspective.
Well, because I think he's going to bed soon. Because I don't know. I'm just waiting for a response though. But it's up to you, Kevin.
No, you can bring him on, but again, I of course, you know,
you can just have him in the studio until like a certain time or whatever. You don't have to have him like on air. Okay. He'll just be in the studio.
We do have a couple more videos to get through.
I'll tell him to stay in the studio. All right.
Yeah, we do have a couple more videos to get through. And you know, I've got one more that I want to go over before the guest comes in. But to just kind of finish up my thoughts on this one, it's just, again, it's ironic how the people who are the first to call you racist and the fastest to play the race card and the fastest to accuse you of being an Orientalist and simplifying and objectifying and fetishizing the Middle East and Middle Eastern culture are the first, you know, that they don't know anything. They are the last to know any of the nuance in the region. To them, the whole region, with the exception of Israel, is just brown victims of America. They don't understand it. That's the extent of their knowledge of the Middle East. And that extent of their knowledge means that they think that like Pakistan and Afghanistan, I'm sure some of them probably think Romania is part of the Middle East. They're clueless, man. They're clueless. So with that, we're going to get into our next video. This one's really short. And I'm going to preface it because it's short. I just want to give some context. This one's from a little over a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago or so. I haven't gotten to address it on this channel yet. It's a video by Vosh. We've talked about some far right kind of people, some right wingers. Nick Fuentes, you can't really tell if he's a commie or alt-right anymore. But then we got Vosh, who is a communist. He's left wing. And listen to how he sounds. In this clip that I'm about to show you, you can't tell if he's Nick Fuentes now. Just watch the misogyny unfold.
So I say, and I'm very brave for saying this, you know, and I do think I deserve a little bit of applause. Fuck Elizabeth Warren, and also fuck women, honestly. I'm a Bernie bro, ride or die, you know.
So the context for that is that was when Bernie was close to dropping out. Elizabeth Warren was still in the race. And Vosh, in that clip, it's a long video. I just cut out the juiciest part. He basically referred to Warren's voters as Harry Potter liberals, which is a dog whistle. It's a dog whistle. And I'm going to bring up the meme that Arthur made about that, you know, because he thinks that they're just women who they'd rather read fiction and stuff and vote for Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren than read Class Consciousness and Karl Marx and vote for Bernie Sanders and have an industrial revolution or whatever. And so with Vosh there, he lets his mask off, because in the rest of his work, or a lot of his work, he'll talk about how, well, if you're a true leftist and a true communist, you care about women's rights and minorities' rights and everything. But no, when he's losing, when he's watching his campaign, when he's watching Bernie go into the dustbin of history right before his eyes, and he blames Elizabeth Warren on it, he doesn't just blame Elizabeth Warren. He slaps that
he
blame
blames all
upon
women.
the entire sex. So
I'll
maybe
give him that might have been a joke.
To be slightly fair to him, he did have a redemption arc after this, where he sort of pseudo apologized for those comments apparently, and then he swung around the other way and declared himself to be riding with Biden, and told everyone that they should vote for Joseph Biden despite this, because otherwise you'll end up with Trump getting back in.
But
so
then he got
did
canceled.
Use his position responsibly. And
right. But the thing is, he got canceled because people like Sean and Jen were like, dude, you're voting for a war criminal.
Oh,
there's
my God.
whole threads on this. They were like, dude, you're voting for the neocon, which is kind of weird because he's not a neocon.
He's not a neocon. Joe
Exactly.
Biden is not a neocon.
But Sean and Jen
things where, no matter what Vosh did there, he could not have won. Because if he went with the Bernie bros, then obviously he would end up in that kind of clip you just showed, which is obviously reprehensible. And then if he says, okay, I apologize for that, let me go the other way and support Joseph Biden, then he gets cancelled again. So it's just like, what does he even do in that situation?
Exactly.
Well, it's good for Joe Biden that he pulled his endorsement. I feel like Vaush's endorsement at least loses you 100 voters or so.
Right.
Oh man. I mean, Vaush, this guy, Vaush or Vosh or whatever his name is, this guy, this isn't the first time he's talked about this either. I've watched other streams of his where he basically gets at the idea that that women don't know anything about politics, basically, and that they just read fantasy books. They read Twilight and Harry Potter, hence why he calls them Harry Potter liberals. And he's got a longer segment where he talks about how Elizabeth Warren and Hillary Clinton, they both just wanted to rub their labia on the velvet chair of the Oval Office, and that was their whole thing. And the Harry Potter liberals, in other words, young women Democratic voters, they just loved the idea of having a female president, and they were willing to sell out the socialist revolution. All this.
I actually thought that would have.
How do you know they're socialists? How can you assume they're socialists? Like, I got news, dudes. Not everybody in the Democratic Party is a literal communist. Like
exactly.
So.
Many people are social democrats or just centrist liberals in the Democratic Party, and that kind of rhetoric he was engaging in, deeply alienating. Not only that, but there's also a fraudulence involved in it as well, because of the fact that there were so many of Elizabeth Warren's policies that were basically just Bernie Sanders policies, but with more explanation. So,
honestly, less explanation, because sometimes the explanation wouldn't even make sense. Like, she had the same healthcare policy, yet she somehow came down like trillions of dollars less than Bernie's for some reason.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
there were little disparities like that, but I mean, in terms of like the general direction in which they were going, I never understood why there was this big fight of Bernie and Warren are somehow fundamentally different creatures who will deliver to you. One of them will somehow deliver you to the pits of hell, and the other one will take you to heaven. Like, I mean, obviously neither of these two extremes are true, but I just didn't understand the absolute loathing that they had toward Elizabeth Warren for just being. I mean, you can even argue that Elizabeth Warren had an excess credibility factor because of the fact that she didn't have the kind of past history foreign policy statement blunders that Bernie Sanders had. Like, for example, this stuff with Bernie Sanders praising the Sandinistas, for example, this stuff with Bernie Sanders praising the USSR, and the thing with the Soviet flag inside of Bernie Sanders' office, and all of that kind of stuff. All of those little
the Cuban Revolution was deep. The Cuban Revolution
that
was
one as well.
Deep.
All of these things were things that Warren didn't have as baggage, right? So you would figure that they should actually like Warren more because you can actually sell her to Middle America better than you could sell Bernie Sanders.
But Vosh is a communist. He's a literal communist. So that's why he hates Elizabeth Warren. He thinks Elizabeth Warren is a liberal. He said on other streams that there is no real difference, substantive difference between Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren, which is hilarious because if you watch Young Turks, look at how they talk about Warren and then look at how they talk about Hillary Clinton, except that's not even necessarily true anymore, because once Warren was in the race against Bernie, they were no longer so happy about Warren at that point.
Well,
And
Steve,
they had a lot of
this is why, even though I don't agree with him on all the issues, I still like Sargon, because I really enjoyed that one 5-hour-long debate he had with Vaush, where Vaush completely falls apart whenever he has someone who's like mildly good at thinking things through. And that's like, I don't watch a lot of people like Vaush just on their own, like some of you people do, just for fun, just to make fun of them. So whenever when I saw that clip, I actually thought he might have been joking or something like that. But as I've studied more isolationists, and as I've watched more of their content of them just on their shows solo, like I get they are that crazy.
Well, see, the other thing, at least
he's unironic, yeah.
Well, see, at least with like Joe Biden, like at least he'll like call out Castro, because when they were on the panel, like Joe Biden said like Castro's bad, you know, and then Bernie Sanders has to have this long-winded like explanation and this whole thing, and this whole thing's like, dude, can you just answer the question of like yes or no? Like, can you just be like the other guy?
But he gave the kids education.
No, it's like his whole thing. His whole thing with Sanders basically goes back to this meme right here. Like, actually, it wasn't real communism. Okay, it was technically an authoritarian, degenerate worker state or whatever. Okay. Oh, we have Dylan Meisner in the chat right now. Speaking of cringy remarks, we have Dylan Meisner. He's got a sock this time, I guess, because he needed to have a follower for his account.
Do you want to add him on? If Will's doesn't come on?
Weren't you okay? You know what? I think we've only got one video left to get to, which means we can open that up. We can have the hater on. We can have the hater
All right,
on.
You want
I want to drink from their fountain of knowledge.
Yeah.
You want
bring
him
on
on?
Miltro.
Send
Bring
the
on
link.
Miltro. You guys have been waiting for this in the chat. I told you. I teased it. I said, we were going to have a special guest, a very special guest, on tonight, a controversial, interesting guest. Bring on Miltro. Bring him on. Let's do it.
I sent out the link, but he hasn't responded. I sent out the link like 10 minutes ago, and he hasn't responded yet. So that's what I was saying. Like, I think he fell asleep and went to bed. But I can send out the link to our other friend over here too, if you want.
Oh, Lil Dill, Mediocre Meisner.
Yeah, you want to give him a shot?
Yeah. You know what? Let's bring on Mediocre Meisner. I mean, it's a horseshoe theory stream, and Mediocre Meisner sounds a lot like some of these commies. So, oh man.
Here.
We're up to 3 viewers.
I sent him the link, so if he wants to join, he's all up to join. He can join the link.
I should pad out the numbers. I always just sit on the Twitch with all the sound off.
Oh man, I like how the other day I'll get to this. Nutso Liz had a stream yesterday, and I went on for a few minutes just to watch, and they were talking about me, and Millsrow was in her chat saying like, basically like, oh, are you watching Kevin Castley or whatever? And she's like, are you a fan of Kevin Castley? Like, do I need to ban you? And I thought it was funny because anybody who knows Millsrow knows he doesn't really like me very much. He doesn't really like me. He's not really that much of a fan. But then she went to watch our stream, and she's like, what? He has a full panel? Wait, he has like 3 more viewers than I do. And I got a kick out of that because obviously like she has like 5,000 followers. I have like 500, but at the end of the day, she's got her little simp army, and we got the hot gang. So, it's not a question who's going to win that. So, oh man.
All right, so I just sent the link to Dylan.
Oh yeah, Lil Dill.
Yeah, I because his DMs were open, so I sent it to him. I told him like, hey, a gift from Kevin.
Yeah.
So
he's calling me a commie now. He's calling me a commie. How cute. How pathetic.
I just clicked onto Liz's stream, and man, if you ever want to see a lot of mediocre looking socialists just sort of like mincing around on camera, then go and watch their debates. It's honestly more entertaining with sound off, with all them, like cutting their nails while pretending to be intellectual.
No, I watched a few minutes of it. I watched a few minutes of it earlier tonight because somebody said, it might have been you, Wyatt, how it was like the audio was super cringe, and I'm like, how is their audio this bad? I mean, sure, ours isn't crystal clear, but it sounded like a circus. It was like it was a clown show.
Oh, the libertarian guy was just like, oh yeah, guys, I think that there should be like less government, and then like the socialists would come in and just like scream into the mic. It was like, like,
well,
everyone's
probably
so down.
They probably bought it from North Korea. They get it shipped from there because they have to make sure it's anti-imperialist, right? So I sent out the links. I'm telling everyone here in the chat, like, hey, if you want to be with Kevin, now's your chance. We have the Thunderdome. The Thunderdome is open.
Liz too. I don't think Lil Dill. I think Lil Dill is scared. I don't think he's going to come in. You guys send it to Liz. I could actually.
Okay, I sent it to Liz.
Liz might actually have the courage to come on. Lil Dill, he's the kind of guy who just leaves his little drive-by comment, takes a screenshot to claim he owned me to his buddies, but then never actually engages or listens very much because he's just, I live rent-free in his head, but he's too afraid to challenge me directly. Now he's saying, "Cry hard, neocon. Trump 2020, keep America great again."
Is he even a Trump supporter?
He's not a Trump supporter. Yeah, he's like he claims to be standing for Joe Biden. Maybe it's somebody else.
Well, dude,
it's probably Henry.
Some of them. Oh.
Dylan, if you want to join, man, you have the opportunity to do so. The Thunderdome is for you, buddy.
Yeah,
we want join the ring.
We want noted author Dylan Meisner on the stream.
Esteemed journalist, mediocre Meisner, Lil Dill. Oh man.
Well,
I'll be back in a minute. I'll be back in a minute, guys. Right. You can like meme away and stuff.
Just for everyone in the chat, it's like I know some people complain how like Kevin Castle doesn't debate a lot of people. He wants to give people a chance tonight. I spoke to him a lot, and this really is your freebie to come on here. So if you want to debate Kevin, this really is your chance because he does not do this very often. So,
it's too bad Milsro's asleep.
We had to beg to get Milsro to have him agree to come have Milsro on.
Exactly. After all the jumping around and all the talk, it takes them so much effort to actually just come on and get attacked.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that they don't even come on and get attacked. They tend to come on and attack like Kevin.
And then trip over themselves.
Kevin only attacks them towards the end when he finally kicks them off.
Right. So, I sent out the links. Again, anyone else in chat, if they want to just link to Twitter or whatever, and I will give you the link and you can come in. Because again, if you think, you can beat down Kevin with great arguments, he's all eyes and ears open, unironically this time.
I'll send the general link to the to Liz's chat just to see if they want any good content.
Okay, yeah. I sent out the links to those 3 people, but yeah, if there's anyone else that has contention with Kevin Castle, I know there's other people. If they would like to speak for like a half hour or so, they want to come on here. There's one more space open.
Any takers?
Not yet. No takers yet. I think they all fell asleep. Maybe. I don't know. Come on, Dylan.
Can somebody see her Twitch and post it in the comments if she's still streaming?
She is.
I think people are just scared of you.
Oh, I agree. I know for a fact that Lil Dill would never really come on here. He just leaves his little drive-by comment. Liz is somebody that she would be braver than Meisner. There's no question on that. Like Liz,
the thing is, I think we should highlight the fact like none of us have degrees in this stuff. Like none of us are have PhDs on foreign policy or anything like that. It's just that the neocon argument tends to be far better than the isolationist argument. So we don't even have to particularly know that much to sort of out debate them.
Well, yeah,
the issue is that they're working with like a half a deck of cards.
I've got a BA in political science and economics, for example, and I can tell you a lot of the knowledge that I've got on foreign policy, especially, is my interactions with the fringe and cringe brainlets. But you know what? It turns out he went and actually proved me wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, patrons of the channel, viewers, friends and fans, haters and traitors, we have with us tonight mediocre Meisner. Let's give him a round of applause. He came on. Well, welcome, Dylan.
What's up, Dylan? What's up? Congratulations.
I actually respect this.
Thank you.
Oh, man. Yeah, this is happening right now. So, hello.
What's up? Congratulations.
Thank you.
Oh man, we're up to 25 viewers.
Should we start up a topic on anything, or should we just sort of like dive into like a video, or what do you want to do?
Wait, Reese or me?
Oh no, just for it to sort of fit the format for having Dylan on right now.
Yeah.
Oh
well,
yeah,
I guess...
is there a topic you guys wanted to go over? Is there like a huge disagreement?
He's been begging me for a debate on foreign policy since I believe January, if I recall. So now's the time. Now's the time.
Just name the one thing that you think Kevin is.
All right, what do you want to debate in
1000%
terms of what we
wrong
disagree on? We could do Iraq, which I think would probably be our main disagreement. Or I don't know what else we disagree.
Yeah,
on.
sure. Let's do Iraq. Let's do Iraq.
All right, let's do Iraq then. So are we going to? So I think the Iraq debate is quite nuanced because of the intelligence that suggested weapons of mass destruction. Obviously, if there was weapons of mass destruction, I think the invasion was justified. But as there wasn't, I think it was not the right choice because it ended dual containment, which was a strategy that worked for American interests, particularly Israeli security. I think that while Saddam Hussein was obviously no angel, and he did attack Israel in the early 90s, I think it was 1991, I want to say, it was either 91 or 93 when he started firing Scud missiles at Tel Aviv. I think generally dual containment was good for American interests in the region. I think losing that check on Iranian power and allowing them to pivot into Lebanon, into Gaza, into Iraq even has been a huge mistake.
Sorry. Can we before we move on, just so we don't end up like going in a circle? Maybe do you want to like have a definition for weapons of mass destruction before we proceed?
We had WMDs in 2003. That's not debatable.
Right. So are we looking more like biological weapons here or chemical weapons?
They're all WMDs. The weapons of mass destruction are nuclear, radiological, chemical, and biological weapons. So.
Even having a specific amounts of
biological
weapons
or the chemical rather, because we know they used them against the Kurds in the early 90s. So I'm not going to debate that at all.
In the late 80s. My question for you, Dylan Meisner, here is that if you, or just say, a common citizen walking around town in 1987 goes and shoots somebody in an alleyway, caps them 5 times, but then he drops the gun in a river on the way back home. And the cops don't catch up with him until 2003, but they got the DNA, they got everything, they finally caught up with him. Does the guy then, the killer, get to say, hey, look, statute of limitations, man, it's been 16 years, you can't arrest me? Or do the cops get to say to him, hey, man, you killed him, there's no statute of limitations on murder? What do you think is the appropriate course of action? Is Saddam Hussein no longer guilty because it was 16 years ago in that case, the Halabja massacre?
So no, I don't. I've never contended that Saddam Hussein was not guilty. I think he obviously did what he did. My point generally about Iraq is that he provided while he was evil, he provided a necessary check on Tehran, who I think is the greater threat that we need to worry about.
So you sound kind of like Henry, or you sound kind of like Kissinger right now. You sound kind of like
I'm very much in favor of realpolitik.
And I think you could be. I think that's a fine perspective. If Saddam had not been sort of been starting to be more of a problem than he was actually worth as a buffer. Whereas Saudi Arabia, no one's arguing that we should go after Saudi Arabia today, but that's because Saudi Arabia stands in line and they do sort of.
I'm not hearing anything from your guys' end right now.
Oh,
I can hear Wyatt.
Yeah. Let us know if it ever comes back.
I can hear Wyatt. It might be a connection issue on your end. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, Kevin.
Okay, but you can't hear Wyatt. That's weird. Okay, well, Wyatt was just basically saying that he was bringing up how, in the case of Saudi Arabia, nobody would argue that Saudi Arabia should be taken out because Saudi Arabia basically plays ball and they work with us and everything. And he was making the point that Saddam Hussein was much more belligerent towards American interests. And I think one of the points that Wyatt was going to bring up was invading Kuwait, for example. So,
I mean, yeah, invading Kuwait was obviously not a good thing. But I still like you don't have to convince me that Saddam Hussein was bad and he did things that were bad for American interests. Like, I'm there. But I think he was, more broadly speaking, him remaining there would have been in our better interest in terms of keeping the check on Tehran, which I think is the bigger security risk.
So you don't think that in a post-Cold War era where the U.S. can just focus on taking care of business and not have to deal with massive superpower conflict, that the United States couldn't deal with Saddam and then say 5 or 10 years later deal with Tehran? You don't think that that's a thing? You think it's like one or another?
I mean, we are. That's what we did. But I think it would have been a better option.
Because isolationists cucking Washington.
I do have I do have one question for Dylan. Okay, so do you see it as more like a realist foreign policy that we needed Saddam to stay in because it was a counterbalance to Iran because the Ba'athist Party was technically anti-Iranian? Like, is that the way you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's more like the Henry Kissinger type that you say that like we should just try to pivot the country against the other one, and like that's how we would benefit better from like that kind of cost benefit analysis.
Well,
it's called dual containment, and I think it largely worked.
Which
is why I also tend to support Saudi Arabia, even though they're obviously an illiberal, terrible regime, is because that's sort of the new dual containment. It's Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Just to add in a little bit of information too, I think if I was like, especially coming from like both myself and Kevin's perspective, probably would have been that we're not imagining that that Iraq would just be gone and then there would just be no government there and no ability for them to contain Iran. The whole point was for America to stay around, nation build, set up a democracy that then could contend with Iran. It's not just we don't want Saddam around at all and we don't want Iraq around and then we're also going to take out Iran. It's that we want a better partner in the territory of Iraq.
But I would just want to jump in with something on that, which is that historically speaking, for some reason, the US seems to have a real problem with committing to projects for over 10 years. And it definitely would require more than 10 years to produce an Iraq in which you remove what is objectively a Sunni-leaning government on what is basically like almost a majority Shia population in many parts of the country, and not end up with basically a Shia Iran sympathetic government emerging.
Well, hey, I've said before that nation building projects can, in many cases, definitely outlive an 8-year term span of an American president. That's one of the reasons why what I do here is to try to change the political culture so that no matter who comes into power, there's going to be a commitment to upholding the foreign policy interests abroad, that we don't get cucked by isolationists. In other words, regardless of whether George Bush won or John Kerry won, say in 2004, or whether John McCain wins or Barack Obama wins, you can disagree on you can disagree on taxes, but you're going to have the same policy on Iran, on Iraq, on Russia. It's always going to be American hegemony, American interest.
This is part of the risk factor as well that obviously people in other countries have to take into account, because obviously if we think that there is a possibility that you're going to have basically like seesawing leadership in the United States where they commit 1 second and then they take back another, then you have to start making plans on the basis that you don't expect people are going to follow through with things, and that's where you end up with different countries taking different strategies of saying, well, okay, maybe dual containment then, because of the fact that you can't trust the US to actually commit.
Yeah.
So the same thing happened with this Obama issue.
I gotta bring up Anthony. I gotta bring up Anthony Avistu-Bisson, who's in the chat, because he's making arguments here, and I'd love to have him on, but unfortunately we can only have 6 people in StreamYard sessions. He here is saying how Saddam Hussein, he's actually got the citations for specific resolutions. He says, for example, here, that Saddam's regime was violating UNSC 687, regarding WMDs. Subsequent resolutions to do with Iraq also highlight this. The point is that he not only kept precursors for chemical weapons, which a lot of the isolationists will even acknowledge now, but that he still did have WMDs that were lying around even up to 2003. And this whole idea that you'll see in the isolationist side, that it was just, well, Jaeger's left here, so I'm going to send the link out to Anthony, because Anthony can make these arguments. They're his arguments, so I'd like him to do it.
I do have one point to make, though. I think the other case, for dual containment in the later years is, I don't know if Saddam would have survived the Arab Spring, and that would have caused like Iran to come in. I think that's another point I've heard that's been brought up, because Saddam could have been overthrown potentially by his own people.
That is, why would you wait 10 years potentially? Or
no. I'm saying some people make that argument.
That if you had waited, that's the argument, that if you had waited and then 10 years later he had been overthrown internally, it would mean that you would have literally zero control over what was going to happen after that.
And then Iran would come in faster.
Egypt is far more isolated away from Iran, yet the Muslim Brotherhood still took over after the Arab Spring. Now imagine if you're right next door to Iran, who's going to take over?
Yeah. I just want to say on the point about dual containment, that dual containment sort of thing can work in cases of, say, war of attrition between great powers, like, say, for example, the USSR and Nazi Germany, and you let them fight it out, and you don't necessarily, or maybe you help one side and then maybe you change it around because they're both equally evil or whatever. I'm talking about a post-Cold War era where the U.S. is the undisputed, unrivaled hegemon and unipolar actor with immense power. And the vision coming from Dylan Meisner here is a continuation of Cold War fatalism, and the idea that the most that you could ever hope to accomplish is just have two devils play each other and have all the millions that are there get overrun. The whole point about the victory of the Cold War is that at that point now you can start liberating the world and start cleaning up the mess. As Christopher Hitchens said, you don't do everybody at once, but know that one by one we will come for you. So,
I mean, so I agree with you there, but I think the problem with the Iraq War is that we overextended ourselves in the Middle East, right? I think, like for example, the Afghanistan War, I think you and I will be in complete agreement there. That's 100% justified.
Okay.
But I think we should have finished our Afghanistan before we had our Iraq. And B, I'm not even sure that beyond Afghanistan, just because that was an inherently defensive war on our part, I don't think that that's where the next democratic project should have been. I'm much more interested in Eastern Europe.
To be fair,
particularly Ukraine, making sure they're in NATO, and hopefully also the EU, just so we can have that European influence right up on top of Russia. Same thing ideally with Georgia.
To be fair, once places like,
I don't know, I just seem to think that I would love to see a democratic Iran. I think everyone would, but I think that in terms of priorities, if you have to rank them, I rank Eastern Europe above the Middle East.
Well, I think you can sort of do both at once. It's like how once a country is, and this was sort of what everyone was saying about Syria, is that once you had sort of pacified the area of ISIS, the U.S. just needed to keep 50 troops in a specific area to keep the Turks from coming out and trying to ruin the Kurds. And that was sort of where you were at with Afghanistan, is you have it mostly pacified with not that many troops. And now you can shift attention somewhere else. It's not that something has to be 100% complete, but you can sort of get it pretty complete and then move on. It's like how I don't support the intervention into Libya, because they didn't have an actual a plan B for after they had taken out Gaddafi. If they had a plan B and then they stuck around, that was perfect.
Okay, I just wanted to hello everyone, hello Mr. Meisner. I don't have any particular dog in this fight. I'm not here to, how you can say, ridicule or promote or anything like that, you or anyone else. I don't know who this person is either, so I'm just saying this out of just curiosity, because I like listening to Kevin's streams and I've come on them quite a bit as well because I think the topics are quite interesting. But I do wanted to say that regarding WMDs, it is a matter of fact actually, and this is even acknowledged by the United Nations, that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction, mostly chemical weapons that come off from, of course, as you mentioned, the end of the 80s with Al Anfal campaign and subsequent, as well as the Gulf War as well. But the thing is that I wanted to note that one of the reasons why the United States actually intervened into I guess, Iraq, was because this was at least the legal justification given for the defense, although this was, of course, poorly argued because the Bush administration was poor at communicating this media campaign. They sort of went with the whole WMDs and sort of exaggerated really the number of WMDs that Saddam Hussein had. And I will concede to that point. But I want to just acknowledge that the United States legal justification for going into Iraq especially was for national security interests, mainly to adhere to keep, I guess, to get rid of Saddam Hussein's WMD production. There's a reason actually why Saddam Hussein possessed WMDs. It's because after the Persian Gulf War, especially, Saddam Hussein was quite paranoid, as you mentioned, Meisner, of, I guess, Iranian influence into the country. One of the reasons why, for example, after the Persian Gulf War, he engaged in the faith campaign to sort of align with the Islamists of the country was to make sure that no internal dissent could be utilized by the IRGC and external actors to potentially pose a threat to his regime. He also kept WMD production as almost, if you will, as a deterrent for Iranian intervention. Because at the time of the Persian Gulf War, when it ended, Iraq was in a quite weak state, but it's still sort of championed. You can even still watch videos, I believe, of Saddam Hussein championing the fact that, they possess weapons during the 90s that we will use to strengthen our armies and strengthen our resolve against the evil imperialist entities of the United States, and also to the scourge of the Shia revolution next door. So there was WMDs that that Saddam Hussein did possess, and there's various UNSC resolutions past 687. Because 687, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, 687 was essentially the ceasefire, and a part of the terms of that ceasefire was that Saddam Hussein was to get rid of his weapons of mass destruction, and that weapon inspectors would come into the country to assist in that. What happened, however, is that Saddam Hussein essentially had developed his own department to play a bit of obfuscation to those inspectors and actually to deny sometimes entry into points where he was still producing weapons of mass destruction. Even after Resolution 1441 was passed and you had other weapons inspectors come in, they did acknowledge that there was a WMD stockpile. However, they did say that the stockpile was not as big as you could say the rhetoric was over that the Bush administration had been pumping out at how big the stockpile was. But still, the United States justification for going into Iraq was for national security reasons, that Saddam Hussein did not adhere to Resolution 687 and ergo did not adhere to the ceasefire. Ergo, the United States still has a claim to essentially eliminate this regime for violating that ceasefire as well as subsequent UNSC resolutions. But the problem that the United Nations had with the United States is that to enforce, I guess, an act of war or a sort of a military strike against Saddam Hussein, you have to pass another United Nations resolution. For example, 687, I'm going to let people speak now. I just want to quickly finish this point. 687 specifically stated that, okay, if the ceasefire was broken essentially, then they would have to go back to the United Nations to actually to talk about the next measure in place. Because this is how, for example, the Persian Gulf War started, was because resolutions were violated and then another resolution for the use of force was allowed for the United States and the coalition to go in to get out Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. But this time around, the United Nations didn't buy the argument from Colin Powell and his friends for the United Nations intervention into Iraq. So that's why it's still a point of contention. I would actually argue that the United States had legal justification, but I've heard international lawyers and sort of international scholars who would argue against the fact, because essentially the United Nations didn't go through, sorry, not the United Nations, the United States did not go through the same process that had been done for the Persian Gulf War. So it's very contentious, I guess you could say, but I would say that's what I would argue and what the positions are. So I just sort of wanted to present them, so I didn't want to come off as totally, one-sided on this matter. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, no, thanks for the information there, Anthony, of course. And with respect to all of that, I think it's also worth noting that under you're talking about the resolutions and the international framework for providing a justification to go in. It is also worth noting, and I would make the case that, like for me myself, I'm not a Westphalian. I view sovereignty as earned and not just an inherent property that is simply afforded to you for being the leader. And Christopher Hitchens, of course, points this out, that the four metrics that you can measure whether you are worthy of sovereignty, whether you have earned your sovereignty, is if you finance or provide safe harbor to terrorism, if you violate the Non-Proliferation Treaty, if you commit genocide, and if you commit acts of war of aggression, essentially. And in the case of Saddam's Iraq, he violated all four of those. He invaded Kuwait, obviously. He committed genocide against the Kurdish population in Iraq. He provided financing and harbor to terrorist groups and against Israel and whatnot. He also attacked Israel. That's another thing. And Meisner, you even noted that he did lob scuds and whatnot against Israel. So it wasn't just Kuwait and Iran that he had military aggression towards. By all metrics, he was a menace to his own people, and he was a menace to the international community. And the argument that I seem to be hearing from you is that you find it to be the case that you're not necessarily disagreeing with the fact that he's a menace or whatnot. You're just saying that from the standpoint of what's, I guess, in America's best interest, you would just have him and Iran play themselves against each other for, I guess, a million years or whatever, their regimes against each other. I guess my point is just to Dylan here. At what point, given the violations of sovereignty and everything else, at what point, also given the fact that the Soviet Union's gone now and there's no real challenge to your movement in the world now, at what point do you finally exercise the power that you have as a hegemon to make the world a better place? That's my question. I'm not a fan of Kissinger. Kissinger, he would have had all the power in the world, and he still would have worked with evil. So, I don't like that. So that's my view.
So obviously the world of 2003 was a lot different, and we had a much more tame Russia then. That was when Putin was just coming into power, and he was dealing with a lot of stuff inside of Russia, particularly, his own troubles with Islamic terrorism. So yeah, that's a much different world, but I think the fact that we slept on Russia, the fact that during the 2012 debates, Obama told Mitt Romney that the 1980s called and wanted their foreign policy back was a huge mistake. I think, like I said before, I think the invasion of Afghanistan is completely justified. But I do not think all of our attention should have been devoted to the Middle East. I think obviously securing our ally Israel there should be our top priority. Advancing human rights in the region should also be a priority, but it should be largely secondary to sort of controlling Iran and making sure they don't go beyond that region, right? And this is the problem with Iran, is that now they're beyond the region, right? You have Hezbollah, well, I mean, maybe not they're beyond the region, but they're much more far-reaching now than they were before.
Right. I would say to that, in respects to Iran, I think part of the reason was the pullout, obviously, because when we pulled out in 2011, Iran was able to kind of creep in slowly but surely, kind of like the rise of ISIS a little bit. And then when we went in 2014 under Obama with the coalition, we only focused specifically on ISIS. And I get why, because that's what the resolution was there for. However, we kind of ignored the Iranian proxies. They were also technically sort of killing ISIS too. I mean, we mostly did the bigger part of that in that theater. But the problem was we've kind of also neglected Iran for a really long time, whether it be in Yemen or in or Lebanon, or I guess in the case of Syria. We've kind of just pushing it to the side. We didn't even really recognize it for a really long time, and it wasn't until Trump that we actually registered the IRGC as an actual terrorist organization. Because I think part of the problem with Bush was he kind of kicked the can down the road a little bit. He had the sanctions of 2007 and the arms embargo, but he didn't do as much though. I guess, as far as containing the Shia revolution. And then under Obama with the Iran deal, the Houthi rebels started they get supplies, and you have the Syria thing. So I think this is also like beyond Iraq too as well, because like even if Iraq wasn't invaded, they would still be like in other countries, of course. I think that's another point I think some people don't get, or I guess don't understand as much with other civil wars.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that's probably just where our fundamental disagreement is that I think that Iraq was largely containing Iran. I think Iran has been now allowed to pivot to, like you said, supporting Assad in Syria, who, I mean, they support him to the tune of something like $6 billion a year, which is like, this always makes me laugh when people say we need to lift sanctions against Iran for humanitarian reasons. It's like, they have $6 billion per year to spare for Assad. Like if they actually, when Hassan Rouhani goes in front of the UN and does like the whole crying, oh, this is economic terrorism act. It's like, go fuck yourself, dude. Like,
can I just say that when it comes to Saddam Hussein's regime, I do remember early arguments of the 2000s and 2001 and even 2002, as late as 2002, between pundits. You can still find these conversations on C-SPAN. I know a couple of them involved Christopher Hitchens, where there was arguments being raised that, okay, there was growing internal dissent under Saddam Hussein's regime, and that his country was actually becoming much more unstable. And that was just a matter of time, whether the US or someone else, before this regime crumbled. And there was a lot of arguments from people prior to the Iraq War that said, why don't we just allow this regime to fall? I mean, why should we invest money, or why should we even go in there in the first place? This is, of course, before the whole I think this was probably 2000 debate, but it's just you could say there was protest movements within Iraq that were emerging, and that there were arguments being raised by those who didn't necessarily wanted military intervention, but instead wanted this regime to go out another way. And the thing about being a counter to Iran is that I do understand your point, Meissner, that I do agree somewhat with your point, but there's another thing that has to be noted, that it was just going to be a matter of time before this regime crumbled. And regardless of when it crumbled, in a couple of years' time after, if for example, the United States had not even gone into Iraq, it would have crumbled by, I would say, 2005 or 2006. Either way, the Iranian regime would have come in anyway. So it was sort of like a problem that was going to come anyway, whether or not the United States entered or not. So this whole notion that, okay, Iraq was keeping Iran down, I mean, yes, to a certain extent, but eventually it was going to crumble that state. And then, of course, Iran would have come in through the buzzer room, which it was already going to do during the Iraq War anyway. So if
you look at the surge specifically during the Iraq War, they were actually able to bring down the death toll by quite a bit by December, I believe, of 2008, or I think it was then. But when George Bush sent in the 20,000 soldiers, we were able to quell, a lot of the violence that was going on there eventually, and it's like, the thing is, like, I think it's more when we left is when like that problem really started to emerge, and not necessarily Saddam Hussein himself, because as Anthony mentioned, Iran could have came into Saddam's territory, and then we don't know who's going to take control. And I'd rather have the U.S. kind of fill that power vacuum like quicker, just to get the head start. That's just the way I see it.
I don't think we should I don't think we should ever sort of do the whole hindsight's 2020 thing and just assume that people like Barack Obama are going to pull troops out. And just sort of going back to the topic of Dylan left, but anyways, but going back to
I'm not sure, that might have been a connection issue.
Yeah, I think that was a connection.
I'll give him a minute, because it was a generally actually kind of a respectful debate so far. I don't think he would just leave like that.
Yeah, no, I respect him. He's not lashing out like Mills Rowe.
Well, can I just quickly, before you continue, the thing is, he said I'm going to log off, I need to sleep, good talking, guys. Yeah, I mean, the guy was actually quite nice, and I don't know, he follows me, and I don't have any particular issue against him or the Liz person, so I think that was a respectful debate, and I must commend him for the respect. And I actually commend everyone for the civil discussion that we actually had about that. I think it was pretty good.
Yeah, no, I'll say I see the message now here. I just didn't notice it before. Yeah, no, fair enough. It's probably late. It could be much later where he is, so that makes sense. You know what? I'll give you credit to Dylan Meisner here. I didn't think you were going to come on, and you did come on. So you know,
and
we
he
had
didn't
an
immediately call you a white supremacist.
Yeah, no. I mean, Dylan Meisner is not like Millsrow. Millsrow is a completely different level. I mean, and Meisner and I, it's just, you know, it's like goofy memes and stuff. But you know, I think given the argument that Meisner made there, we, in the grand scope of U.S. policy, Western policy in the Middle East, we probably agree on probably more than 50%, I would say. So, you know, yeah, we can have a respectful discussion there. So
I think the other thing too, as far as interventions go, is in 2015, you know, Obama allowed the Saudi coalition to go into Yemen, but the thing is, you know, the Arab coalition to go into Yemen hasn't been very successful at quelling the Houthi rebels or anything like that. And I would have preferred that if we were going to intervene in Yemen, that if we were to go to directly, you know, it's one of those things where it's like some of those allies that we have in the region, like they're not always as helpful, you know. And I guess that's like another example of that, because you know the Houthi rebels are only getting stronger, and we might have to take a more direct
stronger
role.
words. I would say they're feckless at best and harmful at worst. I mean, we all saw that thing where they ended up using weapons in ways they're not supposed to use them. You know what I'm referring to, right? I mean, this is one of those things where it looks bad when you have Saudi Arabia essentially dropping things in the middle of markets where there are just like civilians milling around trying to buy things, all of that sort of stuff. And it's like, what? You end up with a lot of people asking, why are we doing this?
Right. Well, I think part of the thing was like, you know, like Obama just wanted to provide like indirect support for the Saudi regime to go into Yemen. But the thing is, I mean, in best case scenario, if we were going to go into Yemen, we should be the ones who lead into Yemen, because I think we would be better at taking out the Houthi rebels.
Yeah,
because
and
I don't
leading
see
from
the Arab.
behind. I agree with you that leading from behind also creates other externalities that people haven't thought about. Because when you lead from behind and you put someone else up at the front, you don't have to control what their priorities are. They may have some ulterior motives that you don't know about. So, for example, we saw that stuff with the documents that were coming out, where people were questioning like where weapons were actually going to, because of the fact that you could actually track some of the serial numbers on weapons, and then find that next thing you know, Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is using them.
Well, not only
that means at least one of the US's allies in that region is allowing weapons to go to Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula purely because those people are fighting the Houthis.
I just want to say before we continue, just because Dylan's still here in the chat. I think, you know, we had a pretty respectful debate so far, and you're welcome back on the channel. And just for the record, I unblocked you on Twitter, so you can DM me and stuff now. So hopefully we can work to resolve our differences, not to agree on stuff, but you know, to get to a more sort of amicable interaction. So
well,
thanks for coming on.
I was just gonna say, like, as far as like you know, like that coalition goes. Right. Well, the other thing in that peninsula too is that like just recently the southern transitional government or whatever in South Yemen has just declared, I guess, as de facto independence from the Saudi one. So the Saudi and the UAE rebels are fighting each other, and it's like, well, we should probably be more directly intervene, you know, into Yemen. So it's one of those things where it's like we can trust allies to a degree, but sometimes we have to go in there, and that's what's going to solve the problem.
Yeah, I'm going to finish up what I was saying before about Iraq and just sort of circle back around, and then sort of like that's why I wouldn't exactly trust Iraq to be a buffer against Iran. Just going off also what Anthony said is that they were actually still starting to fall apart towards 2003, and it's like, one, not only is that not going to be an effective buffer against Iran, and it's just going to be a walkover if they went to war probably by 2005, 2006, but the thing is, dictatorships like that tend to lash out at neighboring countries when they tend to be going down. It's like Anthony can probably correct me if I'm being dumb here, but the reason that part of the reason why they invaded Kuwait is that they needed revenue, and because their economy was absolutely failing.
I'll add a caveat to that before before Wilder continues. That's correct. Actually, the reason you mentioned that, you hit the nail on the head, is due to revenue, because the fact of the matter is that they had wasted billions of dollars fighting against Iran that ended up in a stalemate. So the country is essentially bankrupt, and they look at this tempting oil prize next door to them, and they think, okay, I think we're going to grab that, boys. We're going to grab that, and we're going to, take it over, essentially. And that's why. That's the big reason why, essentially, Iraq went into Kuwait. But you can continue on.
Yeah, well, I was pretty much done, but I think also just on the economic point, this is why I actually don't mind Trump as much as other people on foreign policy, because even though he makes a lot of terrible decisions with a mixture of good decisions, I think he's good on economics. So you never worry that the military is going to be forcefully defunded because he did something stupid with gambling on too many social programs. And I think that's always what people have to take into account whenever they're considering new presidents. That's why sometimes I even though Joe Biden would probably be better on foreign policy, I think he's going to be worse on economics. So I think their foreign policy sort of balances out that way, where he's probably going to have less increases to the military's budget, but he's going to use it slightly better.
Right. Well,
I put a disagreement on that, and the reason I would disagree. I put a disagreement, and the reason I would disagree is because if you're not spending on social programs, including healthcare and mental health and all these other kinds of things that you do in order to have the upkeep of your population, this is the same pool of people that you have to recruit from in order to put them into your military to actually do the day-to-day operations, right? So I've never understood this idea of seeing national security as being somehow separate from social security, because the same individuals have to staff both of these things.
Well, you can just have a better economy by deregulating and letting people operate businesses more freely, rather than assuming that you need to prop people up with programs.
I just want to quickly interject. Sorry for interrupting you, Wallet. I just want to quickly address Ray's point there. Actually, it's a very good argument, really, because it's like the thing with things like climate change. It does, or even obesity. It affects the military, and therefore it's a part of national security concerns. I'm sort of adding
exactly.
To
Yeah, this is something that was actually talked about significantly as well, particularly in regards to the U.S., where they have the cardiovascular health issue that has been going on for quite a while, and they were saying that they were taking a lot of recruits in the U.S. where they're completely unfit at the moment that they arrive, whereas in other countries you don't get a much higher ratio of having to literally remake a whole person.
I'll say with respect to what Wyatt was saying, though, my area of agreement there is that I think that it's basically objectively true that Joe Biden would use the military apparatus in a way that, as far as we would see, would extend American interests better than what Trump has been doing. But that he's going to face, even if he himself wouldn't do it, he's going to face far more pressure from within his party to reduce the military budget year for year than Trump would. And so in that sense, it's not so much that I would say then, therefore Trump might be a lesser evil or something. It's that I wish that there was a Republican leader that was going to be like a George W. Bush or Bill Kristol or John Bolton or somebody like even Ronald Reagan, where Ronald Reagan did do a lot of deregulation, but Reagan was clear that, there is an enemy out there, and we're going to have to spend 8%. He spent a lot more than Trump spends as a percentage.
I'm not even against social program spending in general. I just think that you have to deregulate and then use social programs to fill in the gaps, where I find that the modern Democratic Party tends to focus on filling in gaps, but way before they even consider deregulation. I think it's more, and I don't think that's because that's their philosophy. I think it's just because I think they know that politically it looks better to pass a social program rather than proposing cuts and then
I think it may also be about where the US is right now in terms of where they are in terms of regulation versus deregulation, because they're pretty far down the path of deregulation already. So it'd be kind of weird if Democrats were to come out now and be like, well, we need to deregulate more after Trump has already
to be fair, though, the regulations during the Obama administration spiked quite a bit, and the thing is, even though Trump has brought them down a third or something like that, there are still thousands of pages of worthless regulations that probably need to be gotten rid of.
I will say this about Joe Biden, realistically speaking. I assume that the Senate is still going to stay red, and I've said this before. If Joe Biden does get into office, I don't think it's going to lower. I think he'll just keep the military budget as it is because he'll realize that when he gets into office that most of the people surrounding him, in Congress are going to be Republicans. Though I mean, the House will probably still be Democrat, but he's going to have to face from other different parts of the administration, like different parts of the government, and he's going to have to compromise. And I guess he could probably theoretically lower the military budget, but with a full Republican, well, not a full Republican Senate though, but with a Republican majority and with a Republican Senate leader, like I don't see like that being a big thing. Like maybe if they came to a compromise with a certain bill, I can see that, but I just don't see Joe Biden like drastically reducing the military budget.
Yeah, I don't think he would do it even with a Democratic Senate.
I mean, maybe
he would face pressure, though. He would face pressure from the progressives in his movement to say, "Hey, look, we voted for you against Trump. Now lower the." I don't think that Joe Biden personally would want to do it, but it might be up for concessions to win over progressives. Just to be real, so
Well, I think like something that could happen, like especially like going in for 2020, like if he were to win, like maybe he'll just like reallocate the military spending to just like different departments or something like that. Like he'll maybe he'll make it like in a way that just looks better for him and his party. Because honestly, I just don't see Mitch McConnell wanting to lower the military budget anytime soon.
No,
I just don't see that.
I mean, this all depends also on the on assuming that the Senate is going to look basically the same as it does right now. But if we assume that a person who's voting for Joseph Biden is going to also vote down ballot for Democrats, and let's say that in a best case scenario, you end up with like significant swing where like Republicans get punished for things that they have actually done during the last couple of years. Right? I mean, you could hypothetically end up with a Democratic Senate and then also no Mitch McConnell.
Maybe
isn't it telling though that if Biden does super well during the presidential election, you end up with a whole Senate and House full of isolationists? Because a lot of the Democrats are going to be isolationists more than the Republicans would likely be.
Well, I mean, first, I see that. I mean, in some ways, I guess when it comes to that, I think we would also have to look at, I guess like for the Senate elections, because we have Senate elections for 2020 and for 2022. I guess it's really hard to say, because the thing is, if Trump loses, like where does the party go, right? So it's really kind of hard to say. Well, at least for the first like 2 years of Joe Biden, it would definitely be under Senate control of the R's. But you're right. I mean, maybe in 2022, if there's more isolationists that come around, that could happen. I don't know. It could, maybe some swing states or whatever, like they'll swing back to red. I have no idea how the political landscape would look for Republicans with Trump out of office. Like that's interesting to me.
And I would also say that in terms of the way Democrats might approach foreign policy going forward, we will not know for sure what they've arrived on as a decision until the summer convention is over. And the reason for this is because Biden has decided to basically invite every wing of the Democratic Party, including Bernie Sanders people, to all participate in the process of coming to conclusions on this stuff. So we will only know what they really think about their foreign policy stance after summer convention is finished.
I think that's a bit naive to assume that it's like up in the air, because if you even just watch
Brookings has even done an
state
article saying that they think it's up in the air, where they wrote out a whole thing and said that everything that he said at CFR last time should be regarded as like in flux because it could just magically change anytime.
Still, just the way the Democrat Party has been shifting, and just the way that their presidential nomination race was going, it's like on that debate stage, even when it was packed and they had 2 stages, it was like maybe you could find 1 or 2 more hawkish people, and the best you could get after that was just people who are like Joe Biden, who are like, I guess they'll maybe do some half decent decisions, but it's not like a passion of theirs. And then the rest of the people were hyper isolationists or just like complete military defunders.
Yeah, well, Joe Biden used to be very hawkish. Like Anthony showed me clips of him from the 90s and stuff. Very
during that time. Well, I think for the 90s though, in that time period, like it was like cool to be a hawk. It was like it was cool during that time period because like after those bombings happened, like everyone was like, "Oh shit, Iran could have done this," because they thought at the time Iran was doing those attacks when it was Al Qaeda. But like people were really, really pissed about that with like the Cole bombing, the embassy bombings. Like that's why in that clip, like Joe Biden was furious. He was like, "Yeah, like we should go to war with Iran." But the thing is, from the 90s until now, the culture has obviously changed a lot in like U.S. politics, and it's like not politically as expedient to like be like anti-Russia or China or Iran as much anymore. It used to be cool.
I think the Republican base and the Democratic base are both very isolationist these days.
Right.
But I think that the Republicans are better at placating their base on other issues and then being hawkish in the background. It's like none of them really give a crap about what John Bolton's doing because Trump's deregulating, he's lowering taxes, and he's doing like X, Y, and Z as well. But whereas the Democrats, it's almost like a point of pride to be isolationist and to be like and to defund the military as a politician. Whereas the Republicans will just they'll just mostly just not talk about too much about foreign policy, and then they'll increase the military when sort of like their base is paying attention.
Yeah, no, that's true. And Republicans as a voter base, they'll rally around the leader. And so if all of a sudden, say the leader's Nikki Haley, well, all of a sudden, all the main figures at Fox News now are rotated over. Tucker's out. It's just hawkishness 24/7 on Fox. They'll move overnight to rally around Haley. They'll go from saying, wars for Israel to we need to get tough on Iran. What are you, a hippie or something? Whereas with the Democrats, no matter whether Sanders wins or Biden wins, the Democrats are always going to be divided because the left is a much harder sector to unify in that sense.
I could say a good outcome would be like if you had Biden with a Republican House and Senate, you'd have actually like very good foreign policy. Even if I disagree with the other things that Joe Biden would do, just the way that the House and the Senate could sort of hold him back on certain the other like domestic policies I don't like. But the thing is that they would team up though on foreign policy, and I think we'd have like A- foreign policy for 4 years.
It would trigger Kyle so bad because he would say, "See, I told you he's a corporate Dem. He's working with the Republicans."
That's what it's all about at the end of the day. It's just triggering Kyle.
I'm just saying, man. Imagine that happening.
I'm agreeing with you. I'd love to see that.
He would also lose the broad buy-in, though, I think.
I mean, technically speaking,
most of his voters would abandon him if that happened as well.
Well, I think part of it, though, like when it comes to Joe Biden, and this is actually something some progressives do get right to an extent, though. Like, if you actually look at Joe Biden's record, and you were if you were to pull up stuff from the 70s and 80s, he would be way further to the right of Trump. Like, Joe Biden was actually against desegregation up until the early 80s. There's actually articles and stuff like that. Of course, he changed his mind over time, but I feel like with Joe, he does what's popular.
His objection with the desegregation thing is widely misunderstood, though, and this is one of those things where I'm sure I'm going to get in trouble for this later when I try to explain it. But basically, from how I understand it, Joseph Biden's opposition to the busing thing was based on the complex argument that if you were to force demographic diversity onto people, the backlash which would follow within 10 years from that would be such that Democrats would end up on the losing side of an argument that they didn't want to initiate. And so they said it should be done. And so Biden's position was it should be done on a more gradual basis using different incentives and not just literally taking people, putting them on a bus and driving them to a different location. Biden's idea was you should actually integrate neighborhoods by breaking down the redlining thing, which was always a quasi-moral thing in the first place. Break down redlining, allow people to rent properties that are next to other properties that were previously artificially segregated out by banks and so on. And then when people are living in the same neighborhoods, they can attend the same school districts and it will be organic. And that was the argument that I think Biden was making. But like everyone now looking back on it from the vantage point of 2020, it's like basically just saying, oh, Biden is a racist because he was against the specific busing component of the of the
yeah, pretty much. I almost fully agree with you. The only thing I would disagree on was that the redlining tended to be a partnership between banks and government. It wasn't just banks being like mean. Because at the end of the day, banks make money. But I think he was just more so that you're going fast, so you probably didn't you weren't going to write a novel about it on the spot.
Yeah, of course, obviously, it's in association with the state. Banks didn't just decide that one day by themselves.
This is also why I believe that he would never pick the Kamala Harris as his running mate, because she was the one who implied that he was a racist for opposing busing, even though she wouldn't endorse busing because she's an idiot.
Unless, of course, he does it to neutralize that particular segment of the party.
But here, so I also want to say this quickly too. It's like that you said that you're I'm gonna get in trouble for this and whatnot, and you're right where it's like if you randomly if you bring up busing, everyone just immediately thinks that you're like badly motivated. And I think like the ultimate example of this is like I actually understand why Barry Goldwater voted against the Civil Rights Act, and he was right. He was right at the end of the day that even though it's mean, you should be able to technically keep people out of your business if you want to, because that's actually what's like a big issue that's affecting the U.S. and places like Canada today, because Canada has sort of similar legislation where it's like technically women-only gyms are illegal these days. Because of the Civil Rights Act.
I would say on the issue of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, I take a nuanced take on that. And the reason why is because I can imagine that from the United States perspective, when they were looking out onto the world and they could see that the Soviet Union was producing tons and tons of propaganda on a daily basis, pointing out the fact that the United States did not have equal access to institutions, and they couldn't deny that it was unequal access. It was literally happening. Then the only way to stop that propaganda from continually flowing in would be to do something to make it so that it was not so anymore.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify this so I don't.
They had to pass that anyway.
Yeah, I just want to clarify this so I don't get canceled someday. But I'm saying like I would have voted for the Civil Rights Act. I'm saying that Barry Goldwater was ahead of his time, where he's imagining 2019, 2020 issues from the 1960s. Like nothing, none of the issues that he took.
Oh, you mean having the act being used in ways that it wasn't intended to be used?
Yeah. So like later down the line, he's totally right that technically right now women-only gyms are completely like bigoted based on how the act is made. But the thing is, of course, that's not everyone thinks you're crazy if you think that's an issue in the 1960s. But Barry Goldwater was at least like was a little bit too ahead of his time, so he came off like a jerk for not voting for it, even though he was sort of right on it.
Yeah, they should have had like an amendment in that would basically say, okay, if you're from a marginalized community, certain provisions of this do not apply because we know that trolls are going to come out and say that you're not allowed to have your own space, right?
Well, I think
written in there.
I think partially for Joe Biden, I guess what I was trying to get at is that he's more of a pragmatist too, like when it comes to a lot of the different bills, like the 1994 crime bill, the Patriot Act. I mean, he's voted for a lot of the stuff that's more bipartisan support through the Senate. If you look at his voting record on the issues, like if it has popular support and like generally speaking, like people kind of agree with it, he kind of goes along with it. Because he's not like
1994, the 1995 or whatever number you said, because I have a terrible memory. That was actually a good bill. Like, there's more people alive today because of that bill than anything Democratic.
And Bernie actually voted for that too. That's the thing.
Because Bernie's not as nearly as stupid as his base thinks he is. He's not nearly as like an ideological idol of the socialists as they think he is. He is stupid, but he's not that stupid. But I always hate when people claim it's like, well, it's racist because you were policing communities that were like overall more black than other ones. It's like, but the racism in the 1960s and 70s and 80s was that the police would specifically not police those neighborhoods and just let crime go rampant. But now all these silly activists who don't know history, when police start actually trying to police the community like they should have been doing the entire time, because it's inhumane to make people deal with like criminals themselves. Now suddenly like they are opposing it.
Can we also be said that without security, you don't have much else to build on in a community, because that's the bedrock thing that you need to have. And this is something that happened with the Labour Party in the United Kingdom as well, where you had certain people within the party kept complaining that when Tony Blair and Gordon Brown were in power from 1997 to 2010, right? People kept complaining that, Labour have created a, quote, police state, quote unquote. And the reason they kept saying this is because CCTV cameras were expanded. There were there was obviously the what do you call that thing again? It was a thing where police could go into your community and like give you a warning, even though that thing is not like a criminal thing. It was an antisocial behavioral order. That was what they could they could dispense to people as well, when people are just behaving ridiculously in the street and doing things they're not supposed to be doing. And there were so many civic libertarians who were against antisocial behavioral orders. And I'm thinking, well, if we look at the actual figures in terms of like who has issued these antisocial behavioral orders, what they did in response to those orders, i.e. ceasing and desisting from the negative behavior, why would you want to take that away so that you can have more crime? I don't understand.
it's not even like the behavior, and I know what you're talking about because I know certain laws like that. It's like the behavior is not even like the behavior is not wrong. What people will argue is like, well, it's not technically illegal. I'm like, yeah, but the whole point is that they're basically trying to enforce the law on things that should be illegal. Like you could argue that the antisocial laws should be able to go away after a few years, and they should just pass legislation so they can actually enforce laws on the specific behaviors that they're trying to crack down on.
No, but sometimes
it's like
the things that they're trying to crack down on are so transitional that you could not pass a law on it. So, for example, there was once an antisocial behavioral order issued on wearing a single white golf glove on your left hand, and of course, the reason for this is because a specific gang was using that as a communication symbol, and so they had to have an ASBO on that. And say, okay, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, no, it's like so people start eating. It's like if people started eating Tide Pods and they started like arresting people for trying to for promoting like eating Tide Pods and actually making people like
exactly. You shouldn't have to go through the whole legislative protest just to enhance police power on that.
It should be something where police officers are under heavy scrutiny if they used it wrong. Like if it's a ridiculous thing, like the person was like eating like a sandwich that they didn't like and they arrested them. Like of course that police officers are going to get punished if there's proper mechanisms to deal with that sort of thing.
Exactly.
But that's why libertarians are are some of the more annoying people I know. It's like that clip with Adam Kokesh we showed earlier.
Yeah.
That guy has been arrested so many times for just going into parks where you're clearly not allowed brandishing a gun, and he just goes around loading shotguns in these parks, and they always catch him with like heavy psychedelic drugs in his possession, and with like all these heavily illegal drugs. It's like I find libertarians they just like creating problems a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It's like if you're a good libertarian, and I know good libertarians, I'm not trying to lump them all in, I'm talking about the hardcores, but it's like if you're a good libertarian, you go to your state house and you sort of argue why a specific law shouldn't exist, and that's totally fine. But then you have the people who don't even care to get their law reversed. They just want to have the YouTube video of them being hauled off and saying that this is a police state.
Man.
Well, they're like
I'll just add this one in quickly as well. The other one that the UK did that was really aggravating was during the same time period, there was supposed to be national ID cards and a DNA database was supposed to be created. So like if people commit like small level crimes that they think could possibly, later involve larger level crimes, you take their DNA at the very beginning on the first time they commit some ridiculous crime. And then later on, you can actually do a match to find out if they're linked to, let's say, terrorism, unsolved rape cases, etc. Now, civil libertarians within the Conservative Party in the UK were like, no, we absolutely cannot have a DNA database because that would be a violation, quote unquote, of civil liberties. Okay, so we fast forward roughly 10 years, 12 years or so. Now suddenly Conservatives are like, why do we not have any means of tracking terrorists via their DNA? I don't know, because you guys literally voted it down 10 years ago. Libertarians drive me insane.
Yeah. That's the thing, though. In America, though, like Ron dumber than Jake Paul and Rand dumber than Ron Paul, those guys break from the mainstream Republican Party that way, where they oppose the Patriot Act, that sort of stuff. But you can't really blame their opposition to that on, say, McConnell or any of these other people, because at the end of the day, they have a fundamental different view on the role of government, where mainstream Republicanism, regardless of foreign policy, as it relates to the government itself, understands the government as an apparatus to ensure the safety and security of the people, where libertarians see it as they're out to get you and murder you and show up at your door and do the FEMA camps and make your kids gay with the water. You like the frog.
I thought that during that same time period that like American Republicans, in terms of like what their mainstream position was during the early days of the War on Terror, they were actually more rational and sane than the British conservative equivalents on this issue, because of the fact that, one, of course, they were not in power at the time, so they were just the party of protesting against everything that Tony Blair was doing, which led to a really warped perspective that they ended up with, where they were like, on the one hand, in favor of like just ridiculous like levels of civil liberty where you're not tracking people appropriately, but then at the same time also complaining about the outcomes of the tracking not occurring appropriately. Whereas the Republicans never seem to have gone through that phase.
Right? Like libertarians at the end of the day, they defend brutal dictators, which I always find hilarious. How almost every one of these Tulsi Gabbard supporters I get into with the arguments and stuff, and if I ever bother to engage them anymore, it always goes something like this, where they'll make an argument about war bad or whatever, I'll look at their profile and be like, dude, you're like a libertarian. You got a Ron Paul profile or whatever the hell libertarian it is. Like, don't you claim to care about being opposed to tyranny?
It's
they're
free,
like,
it's freedom for me, but not for me.
Who are we to tell them what to do? That's their country. That's the Dams. Who are we to tell Saddam what to do? And so for them, they see it as the individual if it's whites. But if it's brown people, no, that's their culture.
Well,
man.
actually, you know what's actually really funny about libertarians is that because I used to watch actually just not too long ago I watched like Rand Paul's speech and why he didn't like the coronavirus bill, and even like previous bills before too. I've always watched all the speeches. Almost every single time he opposes like any like spending bill, he always brings up Iraq or Afghanistan. Like within like 2 minutes of the speech, he says, "Oh well, we've spent billions and trillions or whatever in Afghanistan for 20 years. Why are we doing this?" And he always talks about the debt and foreign wars. That's the only thing he likes to talk about. It's like, dude, yeah, exactly.
I want to highlight a comment. I just want to highlight a comment really quickly by W.R. Winter back here. Winter writes, a foreign policy centered solely on triggering Kyle Kulinski would secure freedom and prosperity for the entire world, unironically. And I agree.
I can't agree more. But no, but the thing is too with am I missing my point now? This is terrible. Now I'm going to have to disagree with Winter because I forgot my point. No, anyway, someone else go.
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna say that it's like like all these people like super like ideological too. Like no, like of course, like I know like a couple like center right like libertarians that are like not super hardcore, but some of the ones that are in government, man, they're like really hardcore. Like you spend like a dime on anything, like they'll flip the tables, and they'll always talk about the foreign aid, the foreign wars. And Rand Paul, he said something along the lines of like, if you're in debt, why would you give like your friend money? And I'm just thinking to myself, like, as if like this is like an actual like equivalence, like as if like this is like a real like really good analogy. It's like, dude, geopolitics is very different than giving your friend money.
If you follow my Twitter, you'll know that I am very skeptical about the promotion of the debt economy generally. I see it as a great vulnerability, and I even tweeted out today, I'm like, the one thing that you can take away from the Islamic world is that Islamic finance, there are elements there that we can learn from, where they invest based on value, not on quick interest, that sort of stuff, and big leverage and everything. It's not a thing. And so leverage and debt and all this stuff can really undermine you. However, I'm somebody who generally, all else equal, I prefer lower taxes, and all else equal, I would rather balance the budget as opposed to go further into debt. The exception is, this is me and my ideology at the end of the day once the world is free and liberated. Right now, we're in a world that's divided between the free and the enslaved. And it's not just a humanitarian thing, of course, because the enslaved world poses to us currently a nuclear threat, summarizing to about 10,000 nuclear weapons pointed at us. And at this point, even Ronald Reagan, who was a great reformer of the economy, great liberalizer of the economy, lowered taxes, didn't believe in copious spending or anything. Even he was like, yeah, look, we're facing an evil empire. We're going to spend 8% of our entire GDP on the military. For reference, that would be like if the U.S. spent today $2.5 trillion on defense.
What I don't get about libertarians is this, right? Like, because a lot of them have this idea that like we can get rid of the military, and because we have like over 150 million firearms circulating throughout the United States, like we can use our firearms to like kick out China or Russia if they ever invaded. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, okay, you as a libertarian in your libertarian militia, like, you really think you're gonna defeat like the Chinese or Russian army? Like, are you serious?
They would point to the insurgencies in like Vietnam or whatever, and
those were unsuccessful.
Well, I would make the point to them though that even if you win that insurgency, imagine how crappy your country's going to look and how many people would have died. Whereas if you kept the nukes and you kept the F-35s and the aircraft carriers,
just invested a little bit of your money, you wouldn't have to fight like a 20-year-long insurgency.
And you know what's so funny about those people? No, but those people all spend a lot of money on their own private security of their own houses. They have a lot of guns. They might have like a Price is Fire alarm system.
So yeah, you made a good point. point. The thing that annoys me so much about those hardcore libertarians, and sometimes I give them like I give them too much credit by saying, oh, I have libertarian leanings. I should just say no. I have I have liberty-based leanings. I don't have libertarian-based leanings because libertarianism is giving them too much credit for the beliefs. It's just liberty in general. But the thing is that libertarianism is a lot like socialism in this way. Is it works very well for like a 20-something-year-old who doesn't really have that many costs, doesn't have a family to look after, and has the time of day to run around trying to hire and I'm talking about the insane people, like hiring their own private security force or buying a ton of weapons. It's like it's never going to work for your 85-year-old grandma, you idiot. Like your 85-year-old grandmother doesn't want to hire a contractor to build a road up to her new cottage and then hire a bunch of other people to install the water and hire more people to protect her like through community policing and whatnot. And then I remember the thing I was going to say earlier. We need for next stream to get the clip from the Morton Downey Jr. show from the 1980s of Morton Downey Jr. calling Ron Paul slime on his show.
Actually, what's really interesting.
Someone used to say a long time ago. They said that if your ideal political ideology cannot facilitate a single mother driving her 2 kids to school without them somehow either dying along the way or being too ill to make it, you've done it wrong.
I would like to say real quick about libertarians. One libertarian, like Milton Friedman, he made a point on one of his on a talk show once, I think, because he was debating someone, and he said, we can lose, like we can go into a recession, but we can't lose our we can't lose our prestige on the world stage. You can lose a recession, sure, but you can't lose, your prestige there. So like I thought that was a really interesting quote. I know I'm paraphrasing though, but the way he said that,
he and Reagan were basically libertarian-leaning figures who understood that in an ideal world where the world is America or the world is a Western alliance, that you can lax taxes and regulations and stuff. But they're like, we're in a world that's divided between communism and capitalism. How are you going to go hardcore capitalist, like full-on capitalist, to the point that you're not even going to have really much of a government anymore? And then like, that's not appropriate when you're dealing with an enemy. Like total Cold War is a different circumstance than in your ideal world where we have peace and everybody's free and there's no threats. So
when I was talking to Anthony Moore like alone yesterday, he made a good point too, that all of these sort of like very free utopian type libertarian or like communist societies never last more than a few years because eventually someone just comes in and crushes them. And the ridiculous notion that Kyle Kulinski makes so often that, and Elizabeth Warren too, that like we're never going to get preemptively nuked. No one's ever going to come after us because why would you ever come after America? Like, oh yeah, because the neoconservatives are in charge and no one wants to mess with them. They'll easily mess with you, Kyle. You're pathetic.
There's one of the biggest examples. One of the biggest examples I'd like to bring up is Catalonia. So that was like a libertarian, socialist / anarcho-communist society. Now that lasted around 3 years, 36 to 39. But the thing is, fascist Spain and Hitler, like they moved in and they were able to topple it like very quickly. Yeah. So they don't work very long because the super state will always take control. Yeah. They will pounce on you very fast.
And even a lot of the libertarians, and we're going to wrap up the stream now. We're coming up on the 3-hour mark. I'm just going to say on this, a lot of the libertarians that I've known in my life or people that were in that sort of leaning where, they were into things like Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson and stuff. Some of them did just outright kind of take that pill and became National Socialists and stuff because they recognized that an anarchic sort of system wasn't sustainable. And so they became fascists basically because they realized that fascists would crush anarchists. So
I wouldn't blame Peterson for something like that.
Well, I wouldn't say that it was Peterson's influence or anything. I'm just saying that there are people who went from watching him and Rubin to then watching alt-right figures.
I would give you that. So I wouldn't think. Actually, I'd say that Peterson's almost a neoconservative, where he talks about the evils of like Nazism, communism a lot, to the point where after you watch his videos, if you're not dedicated to eradicating Nazi and communist and like Islamist and other sort of regimes around the world, you've sort of listened to him wrong. And on the topic of Ruben, I think the most offensive thing about Ruben is just he's terrifyingly boring.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's a pretty boring guy. He's kind of a grifty guy. But I do need to wrap up the stream now. I'll be here tonight at 9 p.m. Pacific, 12 a.m. Eastern. Thanks for everybody for watching tonight.
Right.
Thanks for all the guests. Thanks to Dylan for coming on. You know, that was a productive conversation. And with that, we're going to go to closing remarks. So we'll start with Anthony Roberto and go around.
Oh yeah. So I thought it was an interesting discussion that we had here about various topics. I liked how we went over some fun stuff, some goofy stuff.
Yeah.
We saw from both points of view, right? We have the Knicks to the Voshes. They sound very similar to me sometimes, very similar. So we showed that
Cringeward, the horseshoe Ben
Right.
Cringeward.
Right. Wait. Well, he showed how they're very similar with the videos with the clips that he displayed. We talked to Dylan. I think everyone made some good points here. Really good discussion, honestly. It actually went better than I thought. Really. So, if you are watching this, Dylan, or if you do watch this later, I appreciate you for coming on, for someone who has a different point of view and bringing different perspectives, just to the Superpower Broadcasting. And as always, I thank you for allowing me to be on this platform to speak. So, thank you, Kevin.
Oh yeah. Thanks for coming on, Anthony, and we'll see you later. And then with that, we're going to go to Ray Murasame. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, so obviously, thank you for facilitating these conversations. They're really, really good, and we should obviously have more of them. I mean, I would like to see one at some point where we do a stream like just on Afghanistan and breaking down everything that went on there and why, it is necessary for NATO to remain in play in that scenario. So we should do that at some point. I like the title of this stream, The Horseshoe Bends Cringeward. And I think that with some of the clips that you showed, it really does illustrate the bending of that horseshoe. It just wants to go to cringe for whatever reason. So you're doing a great job here. And I hope you get like a lot more viewers and, a lot more exposure as you go on.
No, I appreciate it. I would say same to you. I think Stage 501, it's a really interesting format. I think, one thing that I found that was a bit different going on there as opposed to with my show here is that, you are with the program that you use, you're able to bring on more than 6 people for sure. So you also have less frequent streams, but you tend to have them kind of go longer and have more perspectives on any particular night. But I think it's the sort of thing that it made for it was an interesting experience for sure when I went on. And I think you like I said, you're welcome back on this show anytime. So
all right, thank you.
We're gonna go to Wyatt.
Yeah, it was great. It was great to be on, and I agree that it'd be actually great to sort of do a topic next time where it's like we just sort of hyper focus on one specific area of foreign policy or one specific topic that's just political in general, and maybe we can even take someone's arguments like Kyle Kulinski's, and we can just break down every single thought they've ever had on Afghanistan or with every single thought they've ever had on Syria, even if they're not very deep, and we can sort of steel man them and show step by step how their their narratives don't work. Because I think some of the people who still sort of troll the site and they disagree with you, I think they hear bits and pieces of what you think on each topic. But it's like, I think if you can have a solid live stream where it's just that one topic, they basically can't argue again with you on the topic of Iran or on some sort of other thing like the crime bill or whatever.
Right. No, that's a good point. That's a good point right there. I think, one area that I definitely be down to start with for that would probably be like North Korea. And then, what's going on right now in terms of obviously Iran, Syria. We could just go right all the way through basically. And I mean, I'm even open to doing a stream on Saudi Arabia. It would be an interesting discussion because that's an area that I feel like, especially with the Kyles and the Jimmys and all these people, they basically talk about Saudi Arabia and Iran as if like, oh, they're just the same or whatever. And it's like, I like anybody who follows me on Twitter will know that I see Saudi Arabia as the best of the dictatorships. They play ball, and I see Iran as one of the most dangerous of them, and they don't play ball. So it's like they're not really equivalent in that sense. And at least Saudi Arabia is reforming in a slightly more progressive direction over time towards having open markets and freedom and whatnot. And so it'd be an interesting discussion. And of course, the crime bill. Oh man, we would have a lot of trolls for that one and a lot of haters for sure. A lot of young Turks fans, but I'm really interested in North Korea myself, and so I think we would start it off with that. I know. We've got guests that specialize in different areas in terms of their expertise. I mean, both of the Anthonys here focus very heavily on and have a vast array of knowledge on the Middle East in particular. But I'd be interested in covering every region and going into detail on that. And then of course as you said, right, also focusing on what are the arguments that the isolationists and the anti-interventionists make and debunking them. And it's like I was kind of doing that in some of my solo work, but I've been so busy lately, I can only really manage these streams right now. But eventually, once I'm able to substitute away from a day job to do this full time in the next few years, hopefully, I'll be able to do 4 or 5 videos like that a day and then have the streams. So with that, we're going to go to Anthony Avistubison. Thanks for coming on and your closing remarks.
I just want to say that I also agree with Ray when it comes to these conversations. They're very important, and I do enjoy them thoroughly. I think the topics that we cover are very variant. They're very diverse, and I particularly enjoy it. I mean, whenever you're going to talk about Saudi Arabia or Syria or Iraq or Iran or even Jordan to a lesser extent, I mean, be sure to invite me on, because I've written articles on mostly Syria, Iraq, and of course Saudi Arabia as well. And I do have a sort of a recent article that should be coming out next week on Iraq, but that's more of a news engagement in Iraq for the J Post. But it is always a pleasure to come on. I mean, it will be interesting to go through each different topic and essentially set out the week for what different topic you're going to cover in each video, and it will be really interesting. I really am very, very actually excited to see where this goes, because there's a lot of young people over here who are very knowledgeable in different areas, especially when it comes to foreign policy. We do have beliefs that are in common with one another, and I think that more people actually, especially more younger people, need to get into this debate sort of space, because at the moment it's sort of been kind of owned by more older people, as well as just more, I guess, fringe elements who themselves, I must be honest, when I hear some of their streams, I don't want to sound pretentious or pompous. I get the feeling that they don't know what they're talking about, but they're just going off of talking points, which, as you know, is very different to actually knowing what you're talking about, because what distinguishes someone who just goes purely on the basis of talking points from those who actually know things is just their essentially demonstration of their knowledge through evidence, through argumentation, and through extrapolation. Whereas those who are focused on talking points, they're mostly on the ideological points. They don't really will back up their statements. If they're confronted, they'll sort of go back on other talking points until they get themselves into a rock where they'll start sort of accusing you of this or that. But it will be interesting to see where we go. And with that, I say thank you, Kevin. I thank you, all the others, for allowing me the time to come on and sort of participate with the discussion.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thanks for coming on, Anthony. And I'll say this just before I go to my closing remarks. I just want to say, I've got a new chat out on Twitter where people can send sources and everything and videos and clips and whatnot, so that we can go over them for the stream. I definitely appreciate that. That helped today. A few guys sent some clips, and that was definitely helpful, because I work more than full time right now. It's tough to prepare these shows when you got a few hours of content and everything. But this stream, this was the first time we tried it, and I think it worked out really well. I mean, I found some of the clips, you guys found some of the clips, we put it together. I mean, I think we demonstrated definitively, without a shadow of a doubt, that horseshoe theory, you can call it a meme or whatever. Yeah, well, it bends Cringeward, and that's inarguably true here. I mean, we saw Vosh, we saw Nick Fuentes, we saw Nick Fuentes go full communist, and we saw Vosh basically sound like a tradcon. So there was that, and I just want to say, good night to everybody, and of course, thanks for coming on. Thanks for being with us tonight. And also, if you could remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet, and definitely go and follow us over on Twitch at Superpower Broadcasting. That'd be awesome. I'm trying to get up to 50 followers over there to get affiliate status with Twitch. And with that, we will be back here, or at least I will, and then we'll have another panel of guests at 9 p.m. Pacific, 12 a.m. Eastern tomorrow night. So thank you for everybody, and have a good night.
Bye.